a brilliant scientist and devoted family man.
Eugene was a beautiful person.
He definitely wanted to change the world for the better.
Found viciously beaten to death.
32 lacerations to the face and body.
He had suffered a crushed trachea.
Police uncover a trail of evidence and search for a brutal killer.
The volume of blood told the story of how far the struggle went.
There were numerous items of evidence seized.
Several suspects emerge.
We did receive tips that it was a professional hit.
He was doing work that might have threatened someone enough that they murdered him.
I knew him to be someone who would maybe not want to cross.
Until the case takes a jaw-dropping turn.
And then a bombshell was dropped.
We thought that we were really onto something, and that kind of fell apart.
And the truth is revealed.
You're telling a family that you've arrested the right people.
We were back to square one.
She wasn't telling us all this stuff out of the goodness of her heart.
It just didn't sound like it could be possible.
Norwich is a small city in eastern Connecticut, known as the Rose of New England.
The city of Norwich is an old mill town. It's not as affluent as the rest of Connecticut. There's poverty here. You know, there's hard luck here. But overall, it's a good city. It's one of those places that doesn't change much.
But on the night of May 14th, 2004, Norwich was shaken to its core by a horrible crime.
911. I was coming here to look at an apartment and there's someone laying on the ground. He's not moving and he looks like he's dead.
Police and paramedics race to the scene.
They found a white male in his 50s. There was a lot of blood. It was a horrific scene. And the paramedic indicated that the unresponsive person was deceased. Upon arrival at the scene, we could tell that there was a vicious beating with numerous strikes to the face with some unknown object.
He had suffered quite a lot of injuries to his face and neck. And there was a pattern on his clothing. It looked like it may have been shoe impressions.
There may have been a case of someone either stepping or stomping upon the victim.
The victim's shoes were missing, a wallet, and some other items were missing that he would have normally had.
The missing items suggest a robbery. But what explains the viciousness of the attack?
The volume of blood told the story of how far the struggle went from the side of the house to a car parked in the driveway. The violent struggle had moved throughout the backyard to the location where the body was found. There's always a possibility that it was a random crime, but the manner of death did raise our suspicions about it being possibly more of a personal nature.
The forensic team gets to work.
They collected the blood, hair, fiber, evidence, anything that they could find at the scene.
But this crime scene poses unique challenges for investigators.
The property itself appeared to have been in the process of being cleaned up.
There was a lot of debris. There was broken glass, and there was metal, there was, bike parts.
It was difficult to see if any of that material had anything to do with the crime scene. We did not determine the murder weapon at the scene.
There were numerous items of evidence seized.
We saw a hose in the backyard that had blood on it. A keychain was found at the scene and a brick with some apparent blood residue. The situation with the house told us that the victim was not residing in the house.
Detectives turned to the 911 caller for a statement.
She said she had seen a for rent sign and she called the number.
The woman who answered said that her husband, the owner, was at the house.
She says, "Oh yeah, my husband's down there working on the property. We should go talk to him."
So she went to the property and discovered the body in the driveway. She dialed 911 at approximately 10:55 p.m.
Police now believe the victim is the owner of the rental property, New Hampshire resident Eugene Maloff.
I conveyed that information to the New Hampshire police, and they were able to notify Joanne Maloff that we had discovered someone that appeared to be her husband.
I received a call at 2 o'clock in the morning from Joanne. And she said, Eugene's been murdered. And it just didn't sound like it could be possible, like it was a bad dream. It just rocked my world.
"56-year-old Eugene Maloff was born and raised in Norwich.
Eugene and I were very close, all through grade school, high school. We just loved each other's company. He was just a down-to-earth, sensitive, nice guy.
Okay, come on. Let's do our standard dance.
Eugene and his wife Joanne were married young and soon after started a family.
Joanne was made for Eugene. They were both very outgoing and had a lot of warmth. Eugene was always very loving to the kids, just very gregarious and sweet. We knew from a very, very young age that he was a genius.
He got his education from Harvard and then MIT, and he had a doctorate in environmental engineering.
He wrote books about outer space and nuclear energy. There aren't many people like him who can both understand the science and communicate the science.
After completing his PhD, Eugene embraced cold fusion, a controversial theory about limitless energy.
Gene got deeply involved in cold fusion, which was contrary to a lot of conventional thought at the time. If cold fusion realizes its potential, you would have unlimited alternative energy. Gene definitely wanted to change the world for the better.
Gene was trying to follow his dream and go on the path less chosen, and he was working on new ways that we could stop global warming and have a better world.
All right, there we are. But that's our little house.
Eugene always told his parents that he wanted them to keep the house in Norwich. He was sentimental and he just loved those old memories.
Now, the house that held Eugene's fondest memories had become the scene of his family's worst nightmare.
That was the house that he grew up in, and although he moved to New Hampshire, he had kept the family property and had rented it out for years.
Detectives call Eugene's wife, Joanne, and question her about her husband's last known movements.
She said on this particular day, he had come down to clean up the property, making sure that it was all suitable for renters. And he had a dumpster delivered. Joanne Maloff had spoken to her husband earlier that afternoon, and in fact, she had expected he would be home in New Hampshire by 9 o'clock or so that evening.
Police learned that Eugene had driven his minivan to Norwich that day.
She described the van, and it had some unique markings on it, and also had New Hampshire plates. Mrs. Maloff said the van should have been on the property.
But there was no van in the driveway.
The first thing you're thinking of is that the killer had taken off with Mr. Maloff's van.
He's a family man murdered and brutally beaten. I think that shocks the conscience of any neighborhood.
We felt that whoever was driving that van was complicit with the homicide of Dr. Maloff.
Coming up, investigators uncover conflicting evidence.
They had been involved in a theft of a motor vehicle and some kind of violent struggle.
Blood was sent to the laboratory, but there was no match. It wasn't logical.
and disturbing secrets.
I realized that there were people out there that weren't happy with Jean.
Whose blood is that and where did it come from?
He wanted to commit suicide and was shaking and hyperventilating.
Some of the things regarding her whereabouts on the night of the murder hadn't added up.
I had to accept it, but it was a terrible thing.
Nuclear scientist Eugene Maloff has been found violently beaten to death at the rental property he owns. And police suspect the killer fled in his van.
We put out a bolo, be on the lookout to all the local police departments for the van.
While detectives wait for news on the van, they interview neighbors.
The purpose of the neighborhood canvass to try and figure out when was the last time Mr. Maloff was seen alive.
We spoke to a neighborhood friend of Dr. Maloff. He indicated that he had seen him mowing the lawn earlier that day, and nothing was suspicious at the time. He did indicate that at about 8:30 p.m. that evening, the van was not there, which gave us a time frame to start working with.
Dr. Maloff had been mowing the lawn. Everything had grass cuttings covering it, from abandoned bicycles and debris on the ground, but there wasn't a stitch of grass on these keys. So we believe that those keys were dropped after Dr. Maloff had mowed the lawn, which would have been sometime around the time of the homicide.
Detectives hope neighbors can help them identify the owner of the keys. But then, police receive an urgent call from a local casino.
We were notified that Dr. Maloff's van had been located in the employee parking lot of the Foxwoods Casino, which was approximately 7 miles away from the crime scene. When we arrived, the tailpipe was cold as if it had been there for several hours. The van was towed back to the City of Norwich Public Works Garage so that the State Police Major Crime Unit could process the van.
They searched the van for hairs, fibers, and anything that looked like blood.
They didn't obtain any fingerprints from the door handles or steering wheel, which indicated to us that the driver quite possibly was wearing gloves.
Investigators hope security footage will help them identify the driver of Eugene's van.
It was a hazy, foggy evening, and we weren't able to gather much evidence at all from the cameras at the Foxwoods Casino.
With the killer still at large, police turn their attention to Eugene's wife, Joanne, in New Hampshire.
Probably a 3-hour drive from New Hampshire to the crime scene. The Maloff family, they had alibis, and they were not suspects at this time. Joanne Maloff couldn't provide anybody's name that would have any intention of hurting her husband.
Police asked Joanne for information about recent tenants at Eugene's rental property in Norwich.
We needed to obtain the identity of all individuals that lived in the house. They were definitely persons of interest. Joanne Maloff told us that Jean had evicted Pat and Roy Anderson approximately 2 weeks prior to the murder.
Jean's tenants stopped paying the rent, and Eugene eventually had to look into how to get them out, because I think they were there for a good 6 months before they actually left. Gene didn't want to be cruel to people, and I think he really gave them a lot of leeway, but enough is enough.
For detectives, it's the first break in the investigation.
Pat and Roy Anderson had been living at Mr. Maloff's property for a long period of time up till the eviction.
My immediate questions were, where are the people that were evicted? How do we locate the Andersons?
Luckily, a tip from a neighbor leads police to the Andersons' son, Chad Schaefer, who lives nearby with his girlfriend, Candace Foster.
One of the investigators went to their apartment to get information about Chad's mom and dad, Pat and Roy.
The purpose of his interview was to determine whether or not the Andersons had seen Gene Maloff on the property, if they'd seen him, when they had last seen him,
Chad claims that his parents had not seen Eugene since he served them the eviction notice.
Chad Schaefer said there were no hard feelings between the Andersons and Gene Maloff.
Police asked Chad for his whereabouts on the night of the murder.
Chad and Candace indicated that they were both home with their newborn on the night in question, and that was their alibi.
Chad cooperates with police and provides them with his parents' new address.
I subsequently went out to Pat and Roy Anderson's new rental out in Montville, Connecticut, and interviewed them about Gene's death. Pat Anderson, she corroborated Chad Schaefer's assessment that when they were evicted, they moved on and there was no feelings of animosity between themselves and Gene Maloff.
Detectives still want to know where the Andersons were at the time of the murder.
Patricia Anderson worked in a nursing home. Ian said she was at home after working previously during the day.
Police ask Roy point blank if he has an alibi around the time that Eugene was murdered.
He indicated that he had worked from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning out at the Foxwoods Casino. And Dr. Maloff's van had been located in the employee parking lot of the Foxwoods Casino.
That was very suspicious to the investigator. From the crime scene to the Foxwoods Casino parking lot, it's not far, a 15-minute drive. And then you're thinking maybe this eviction thing was a personal thing. And you have as investigators to figure out who did it so that person can be held accountable.
Police investigating the murder of cold fusion scientist Eugene Maloff now have their first real suspect. His recently evicted tenant, Roy Anderson, works at the same casino where Eugene's stolen van was found on the night of the murder.
Roy reported that there was no animosity about the eviction. There was no problem between Eugene and Roy. But Dr. Maloff's van had been found at the Foxwoods lot.
Angered by the eviction, had Roy killed Eugene in revenge?
We got a list of names of employees that night, and we verified that Roy Anderson was in fact working from 5 p.m. until 1 a.m., and that provided him with a pretty solid alibi that he was not within the city of Norwich at all. Pat and Roy Anderson were both individuals of interest, but they had alibis.
Police want to know if anyone else was living in their house at the time of the eviction.
One of the things that we learned in talking to Pat and Roy, they would bring other people in to help pay for rooms.
We needed to obtain the location of all individuals that lived in the house.
It turns out one of the Andersons' subletters is well known to police.
Lenny Campbell was a friend of Roy's, and they allowed Lenny to stay in the basement of the house.
I personally had run into him a few times during the course of my patrol duties. I knew him to be an individual that someone would maybe not want to cross. The Andersons, when they were evicted, Lenny moved out with them to their new place.
Police want to speak to Lenny, but the Andersons say he recently packed up and left without an explanation.
He moved out shortly after Eugene's murder, and investigators thought it was suspicious.
When police try to track Lenny down, they find he's moved out of state.
Lenny Campbell was working on a farm up in Massachusetts. Lenny denied ever even having contact with Eugene Maloff.
Lenny isn't talking, and there's no evidence connecting him to the crime scene.
At this point in the investigation, we really need some solid forensic evidence that somebody was complicit in the murder of Eugene Maloff.
Police receive the autopsy report, and it sheds more light on how Eugene was killed.
The medical examiner's office indicated approximately 32 lacerations to the face and body.
And he had suffered a crushed trachea.
what possibly could have sparked such a vicious assault?
We did receive tips throughout the course of the investigation saying that it was a professional hit.
Was Eugene assassinated for his research into alternative energy?
I thought that perhaps because cold fusion was so controversial, that maybe it was some kind of planned setup.
I do believe there's always a danger to somebody that's going to rock the boat. I realized that Gene's passion for countering big oil meant that there were plenty of people out there that weren't happy with Gene.
It occurred to me that, he was doing work that might have threatened someone enough that it would have murdered him.
We delved into it, and based on the crime scene and the circumstances in which he was killed, I don't think a professional hitman would go about his business in that manner. It just didn't add up. It wasn't logical.
Police are running out of leads, but then a witness comes forward with a bizarre account from the night of the murder.
We came in contact with a shuttle driver for a nearby hotel sometime between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. on the night of the murder. He had pulled up to a traffic light and saw a van similar to the doctor's van, and he noticed the operator of the van, a white male, was wearing socks on his hands.
Obviously, you start to think, well, if the person's wearing socks on their hands, they don't want to transfer any evidence onto a steering wheel.
Whoever was driving that van with hands covered with socks was possibly complicit with the homicide. Gene Maloff's van had been moved into a fenced-in compound, and we examined it again for anything that we may have missed or the state police may have missed, and we seized a few items to include a plastic bag.
Police submit the bag to the state forensic lab for analysis.
And as a result of that, a fingerprint came back. It was the first piece of evidence that would place somebody in that van, possibly on the night of the murder.
The print is run through the police database.
The fingerprint belonged to a local individual from the Norwich area.
When we ran this person's record, they had a record of burglaries.
He was the type of guy that wouldn't have any problems breaking into your car. Maybe Eugene Maloff got killed for it.
Police have a fresh lead in the murder of Eugene Maloff. A fingerprint on a plastic bag found in the scientist's stolen van is matched to a local car burglar.
The results of that examination indicated that a print on the bag belonged to a Nicholas Gardner.
Police track the suspect down and bring him in for questioning.
He was very nonchalant about the fact that he had broken into the van, but when it was brought to his attention that that vehicle was used following a homicide, his demeanor shifted dramatically, and he became very nervous at that point.
When police grill him further, he makes a startling admission.
He said that he broke into a police impound lot.
He explained that he had broken into the impound lot and was burglarizing the cars. And that would explain how his fingerprints had been found in Mr. Maloff's van.
Police confirm his story when his prints are found on other vehicles in the lot.
Nicholas was definitely wrong place, wrong time, and had no clue that the van that he was entering was involved in the homicide of Gene Maloff.
Nicholas is charged with the burglaries, but it's a dead end in the search for Eugene's killer. Then, police get a call that reignites the case.
We received a phone call from the New Britain Police Department, 40 minutes away from the city of Norwich. A New Britain police officer had come in contact with two subjects. They were in a parking lot. They were asleep in the vehicle. It was a stolen vehicle. It had been reported stolen the same night of Dr. Maloff's murder.
When the officer looked inside the car, he made an alarming discovery.
They had been found with blood inside their vehicle. And so obviously the first inclination is, whose blood is that and where did it come from?
The men are arrested and taken to the station.
When they were taken into custody, they were identified as Joseph Riley and Gary McAvoy. Officers at the scene observed that Riley and McAvoy had evidence of some kind of violent struggle.
Is it possible these two men were involved in Eugene's murder?
We wanted to either rule them into our homicide scene or rule them out.
So investigators from Norwich went up and spoke with Riley and McAvoy at the lockup in New Britain.
Police interview Riley and McAvoy in separate rooms. They press Riley about the bloodstains in the car and scratches on his arms and legs.
Joe Riley told the detectives that he and McAvoy ended up in an altercation with one another.
They both said that they got into a fight in the car, and that's how they had the blood in the car.
Investigators question the pair about Eugene's homicide.
During Riley's interview, he made some statements that really caught our attention. He asked, did the old man get the kicked out of him? But the manner of death of Gene Maloff had not been relayed to Riley at that time.
How did Riley seem to know details about how Eugene was killed? McAvoy's response to questioning raises more red flags.
When the officer advised him that he was being investigated for a potential homicide, Gary McAvoy became very distraught. He indicated that he wanted to commit suicide and at one point curled up in a fetal position on the floor and was shaking and hyperventilating.
The statements provided by Riley and McAvoy were suspicious to the investigators.
Police bring in the hotel shuttle driver who claimed he saw someone driving Eugene's van on the night of the murder.
He told us that the operator of the van was a white male.
A photo array was offered to the witness, and he pointed out to Joseph Riley as the driver of the minivan that he saw that night.
Police now have a witness placing one of their suspects inside Eugene Maloff's van on the night he was murdered.
Riley and McAvoy had been involved in a theft of a motor vehicle and a burglary, and they did have evidence of violent struggle, and the witness picks Riley out of a photo lineup.
Police still lack physical evidence, so they obtain the men's DNA to compare to samples collected from the crime scene and the van.
Evidence was sent up to the Connecticut State Police Forensic Laboratory.
When results come back, it's a major break.
We received a phone call from the forensic lab saying that the hair in Mr. Maloff's van was a match to Mr. McAvoy. Okay, well, that's a blockbuster.
We had solid forensic evidence, and we're going to move forward with the warrant.
Riley and McAvoy are charged with Eugene's murder.
I was happy for the family that maybe they'd get some closure on this case.
But then, investigators receive a disturbing call.
We thought we were on strong footing based on the solid forensic evidence from the van, and the case was going to move forward. And then a bombshell was dropped.
Joseph Riley and Gary McAvoy are charged for the murder of Eugene Maloff after one of McAvoy's hairs is matched to a hair found in Eugene's van. But then, police receive news that rocks the case.
Bombshell was dropped by the state forensic lab. The lab reached out to us and said there was a mistake and that McAvoy's hair was not at the crime scene and were not in the van.
There was a clerical error at the laboratory.
And somewhere at the lab there was confusion over the item numbers. So the hair fiber they tested, they thought came from the van, in fact came from the hair of the suspects up in prison. And as a result, the state of Connecticut decided they were not going to pursue homicide charges against Riley or McAvoy.
We thought that we were really onto something, and that kind of fell apart.
At this point, we were back to square one.
You're telling a family who lost a loved one to violent crime that you've arrested the right people. And that falls apart, and then we say to the Maloff family, I'm sorry, we couldn't do better.
I had to accept it, but it was a terrible thing. I would cry on the way to work, and I think when you go through a tragedy, your world becomes very small. Joanne was very upset, and I saw her break down once when we were going someplace. I was following her, and she lost her way. She just was devastated at that point.
When the investigation went on so long, I had a feeling it was just one of those random events, and we would never learn anything more of it. I think I pretty much accepted that.
The case goes cold. Then, 4 years after the murder of Eugene Maloff, the investigation is rebooted. Determined to solve the crime, Norwich PD assigned new resources to the case.
They put a task force together, and I was assigned to work with the state's attorney's office, along with Detective Terry McFadden.
Detective Curtis and I picked up on the case and basically started from day one.
Cold cases are just cases that take longer to solve than others. It was a fresh start, and it let us get to work on finding out who the real killers were.
We had met with the Maloff family and just told them that we were trying to get justice for Eugene, and we were able to secure a reward for information about Mr. Maloff's homicide, and that's not typically seen in every homicide.
The reward is advertised on a large billboard near the interstate.
We worked with the family, and we came up with the best design possible and put a billboard up where we thought that the most people would see Eugene's face and see our message to the public saying we needed help with this investigation.
After just a few weeks, the billboard starts to bring results.
The day I won't forget in this case is when we had a witness come into the police department and explain to me that they had direct information related to the death of Eugene Maloff.
The witness claims to know Candace Foster and Chad Schaefer. Chad is the son of the Andersons, the tenants Eugene evicted.
Jill Sebastian was friends with Candace Foster and Chad Schaefer, and had actually lived with them around that time of Mr. Maloff's murder. She began to tell us about how when they would see reports about Mr. Maloff's murder on the TV, Chad would start getting kind of antsy. And Candace had mentioned to Jill about Chad coming home with bloody clothing around the time of Mr. Maloff's murder.
Investigators are stunned by Jill's statement, but police have no evidence connecting Chad Schaefer to the crime scene.
Early in the investigation, an investigator went to Chad and Candace. They said that on the night of the murder, they had stayed home and there was no evidence to support any connection to Eugene's death.
Police are eager to corroborate Jill's story. Her boyfriend, Keyshawn, agrees to give a statement.
Keyshawn told us that Chad Schaefer confessed to Keyshawn that he had killed Eugene Maloff.
Obviously, it's a significant development in the case. We started to look at Candace Foster and Chad more closely.
Police learned that in the years after the murder, Chad and Candace had separated. They focused their attention on Candace.
The number one goal for us was to get information from her regarding Chad, being a participant in the murder of Dr. Eugene Maloff.
Police urge Candace to tell them everything she knows.
This is the father of her children that she's now going to be telling us about that participated in a homicide. Candace and Chad had a tumultuous relationship, and she related to us that her biggest fear for her and her children was Chad.
Detectives asked Candace about a piece of physical evidence that could tie Chad to the crime scene.
Candace told us that those keys had been hanging inside the loft at the apartment where Candace and Chad lived. And we happened to find a key ring, similar, at the crime scene.
The information is damning, but investigators suspect that Candace is hiding something.
Some of the things that Candace had said regarding Chad or regarding her whereabouts on the night of the murder hadn't added up. We had to let Candace know that she would have to come clean and explain to us everything she knew about the murder.
When we interviewed her, a little bit of information would come out, and then a little bit more information would come out. And then it reached a point where Candace did tell us someone other than Chad was involved in Mr. Maloff's murder.
Detectives believe Eugene Maloff was killed by his former tenant's son, Chad Schaefer. But Chad's ex-girlfriend, Candace, claims Chad wasn't the only one involved in the brutal murder.
Candace told us that Moselle Brown, he had been at the scene with Chad at the time of Mr. Maloff's murder. Moselle Brown was the cousin of Chad Schaefer.
Chad had been hanging around with Moselle a little bit more often around this time. Moselle Brown had a violent criminal past. We knew of him. We were cautious of him.
Investigators press Candace for more details about events leading up to Eugene's murder. She says it all started when a relative saw Eugene cleaning out the rental unit the Andersons had been evicted from.
Candace told us that all day long, Chad had been getting phone calls from his mom, Patricia Anderson, saying that the landlord was throwing all their things in the garbage. Patricia was really upset and starts putting out pressure on Chad. I told you, you were supposed to get that stuff out of there. You were supposed to have that house cleaned out. I want my belongings. And Chad had gotten picked up by Moselle Brown.
He told Moselle that Mr. Maloff was throwing stuff out that belonged to Chad's parents. They got upset.
And they go over there and they say, listen, we're not going to take it from this guy. And Mr. Maloff says, no, get out of here. I gave you plenty of time to get your stuff out of here, leave. And someone throws a punch. They hit him once, and now once they hit him, these guys don't stop. They just start beating him. And they leave him for dead.
Following the vicious assault, the pair returned to Chad and Candace's apartment.
Candace told us that they returned. And Chad was upset, and Chad had blood on his clothing. And Chad explained to Candace that they had beaten the landlord.
But Candace's account doesn't explain how Eugene's van ended up in the casino parking lot.
Candace wasn't telling us all this stuff out of the goodness of her heart. She was doing this to minimize her involvement and minimize her punishment.
When investigators confront her about her deception, she finally cracks.
From what Candace was telling us, it looked like three of them were involved. Chad Schaefer, Moselle Brown, and Candace Foster.
Candace says she returned to the rental property with Chad and Moselle to cover up their crime.
Candace said they walked down the path to the garage to where they saw Eugene Maloff laying on the ground, and that he was still alive and still breathing, but he was severely beaten. And they realized they gotta kill him.
Candace Foster was a bit reluctant to do that, at which point they threatened her.
Chad and Moselle said if she didn't participate, that she'd be next.
It was a vicious beating with numerous strikes to the face with some unknown object.
And at that point, Eugene's still alive. And that's when Moselle steps on his throat until he stops breathing.
After killing Eugene, Chad, Moselle, and Candace staged the scene to throw police off their trail.
They wanted to make this look like it was a robbery, and part of that was that Candace drove the van and dropped it off in the casino parking lot.
With Candace's story, investigators believe they have enough evidence to charge Chad and Moselle with murder. They arrest Chad Schaefer first.
When the news came through that they actually had an arrest, it was a shock to find out that Gene was killed by a son of a disgruntled tenant. It just seemed unfair.
When investigators track down Moselle Brown, they find out he's serving time in Ohio for another crime.
We extradited him back to Connecticut to face charges for the killing of Eugene Maloff. I believe the X factor was Moselle. He was the violent ringleader, and I believe Chad Schaefer and Candace Foster would not have killed Eugene Maloff in the absence of Moselle.
The three accused are tried separately.
Moselle received more than 50 years in prison. At Chad's trial, he was defiant and ultimately took a plea deal and took the offer that the state put on the table.
Chad Schaefer agrees to plead guilty to first-degree manslaughter.
Chad Schaefer received a 25-year sentence, and he would have to serve 17.5 years.
Candace Foster is the last to face justice.
There's no way that we could have had as strong a case that we did against Moselle and Chad without Candace. And Candace, with her attorney, made an arrangement with the state's attorney's office for her to receive the sentence that she got.
Candace eventually was charged with hindering prosecution and tampering with evidence.
She served 3 years in jail and then several years of probation.
The verdicts bring closure, but nothing can replace what Gene's loved ones have lost.
I'm not a good judge as to whether justice was served, but the bottom line was that we couldn't bring back that special, wonderful man.
I think Gene would like to be remembered as somebody that advanced the deeper knowledge of the universe.
I think Gene did make a difference in the world. I think he could have made a much bigger difference had he been around longer.
I just miss Gene, and I really relish all the memories I have of all the happy times. We all loved him so much. The world has lost a great human being, a great mind, and a beautiful person.
I'm living in the Twilight Zone, and I can hear the theme song going on.
He opened the door, and he was covered in blood.
He was here one moment, gone the next. There's no goodbye, there's no I'll talk to you later, there's no nothing. He was gone.
They were getting these weird messages.
Roses are red, violets are blue, my wife is a whore, your husband is too.
My family and I are begging you, asking for your assistance.
Nothing added up. Nothing made sense.
Had she ever mentioned anything about Mike, concerns about Mike?
She's sobbing. She's just, I know he's coming around. There's stuff, doors that were closed or open. And
Rory told her that Mike got picked up in a black SUV one day, never came back. And I started putting those pieces together.
It made it alarming. It gave me chills. Everything that had been happening for the last 2.5 years was likely a lie.
There was just more and more twists and turns.
They asked, well, when's the last time you seen him? And frankly, I said, years.
What?
This is Claremont, Florida, a rural community about 20 miles west of Orlando, but a world apart from the tourist-filled amusement parks. Michael and Lori Shaver were raising their 2 children here when his lifelong friend, Scott Amatuccio, started to get worried.
We were best friends. We were just always around each other. I could tell something was off. I just haven't heard from Mike for a while. I had texted him at some point in time. He never responded. And then I'm like, what's going on with Mike's Facebook? I go to his page, and he wasn't even my friend anymore.
For friends so close, an unexplained social media slight like this was too strange to ignore. And it turns out Scott wasn't the only one worried.
I would get strange messages. We were just questioning it, like, is he having that many troubles that he has to turn away from his family?
The communication went down, and it seemed to be it was just a text or a social media Facebook message.
We had conversations all the time about, where's Mike?
Have you seen Mike? Have you heard from Mike?
Someone said Michael just took off in a black SUV and never came back. None of this adds up.
Clearly, something wasn't right.
Michael was missing.
He was here one moment, gone the next, just gone.
Everybody's hair was raised, and what's going on?
It was that concern that started the unraveling of a years-long mystery as deep and dark as the lakes that surround this place.
Hi, I'm Michael Shaver. Oh, there I am. That's me. See?
Michael grew up the third child of 4 with his brother and 2 sisters in the tiny rural village of Lawrence in upstate New York.
Our relationship was a very special bond. My mom was a single mother, so I would help my mom out whenever she needed help with Michael. I would always put Michael first.
This is a photo of Mike and I. We're at my house that I grew up in. We would just have fun as kids, ride our bikes all day long and go on adventures, always playing around the neighborhood. He was great at playing drums. Eventually he learned to play guitar. We used to have this band. We called it Rifles and Dandelions instead of Guns N' Roses. That was our silly way of coming up with a band.
As a young man, Michael showed a talent for working with his hands.
I played with tools all my life. I believe that the genes were passed on to Michael because as a kid he used to repair stuff around the house.
He would go around the town and people would actually give him stuff. He would fix it.
He may take an old bicycle or something and fix it up and make it work again for somebody. And it's like a sense of accomplishment, saying, I fixed that.
One time, him and his friend built an airplane out of wood in the backyard. And I swear if they'd had a motor, they would have taken off with it. It was really something. You should have seen it.
Michael's love of tinkering with things, I believe, led him to wanting to work on airplanes. And then as he got a little older, he wanted to learn how to fly.
Flying wasn't the only thing Michael loved. By the time he'd gotten to high school, his head was also in the clouds for Lori Paddleford, seen here in their yearbook.
We all grew up together. It was around 7th or 8th grade. Mike had a crush on Lori. He wanted to figure out the best way to ask her out. We had come up with this great idea of playing Boys to Men in the background. So that's how they ended up dating.
I don't think I really understood how serious it was until after they graduated. Then they were talking about marriage.
This is a picture of Mike and I at his wedding. I was his best man, and this was us together.
Their wedding was beautiful. Lori, she was so happy. I remember Michael couldn't stop smiling.
He eventually got his commercial pilot license, worked for Piedmont.
He loved it, and he used to take his friends up and do loop-the-loops with them, and they loved it.
Soon, Michael and Lori became parents to daughter Isabel and her younger brother Aiden. After moving up and down the East Coast, Michael and his family ended up in the Sunshine State.
When I moved down to Florida, it's when they moved down to Florida.
They moved to Claremont, bought a property, 5 acres. It's pretty rural. It's beautiful lakes, some rolling hills. It's pretty quiet.
He had chickens and guineas and turkeys and quite a few ducks, and he wanted them to have their own duck pond.
In his off hours, he worked as a mechanic for Precious Metal, a local flight team that performs and races all over the country.
We were both volunteers for the Precious Metal air racing team. Reno air racing has been compared to NASCAR of the sky. It's multiple planes on a closed course at one time. Speeds are up to 500 miles per hour. You're 50 feet off the ground. It's a huge adrenaline rush. We spent several years, several long nights, sometimes 3 days in a row working on the plane together. The people who described him as a genius, I would agree. He just took care of it. You knew that the job was going to be completed as it should.
Lori worked from home for an insurance company while Michael was away for days at a time working as a pilot. Wanting to be with his family more, Michael quit the airline business for another dream job, this one at the most magical place on Earth.
Mike and I worked at Epcot together. He was a mechanic.
Working at Disney was just his little kid inside, and he loved that job. You know, he was flourishing.
But then, for some reason, dependable Michael just stopped showing up.
He was here one moment, gone the next. No goodbye, no nothing.
It seemed Michael Shaver was blowing off his friends, his family, even his job.
When the manager contacted Mike, Mike's response was, "You can go ahead and fire me, I'm not coming back."
But if Michael Shaver wasn't coming back, where exactly was he going?
For Lori and Mike Shaver. Mike was about the same age as my oldest son, so he was kind of like another son to me. My home was probably 50 feet away from their home, no trees in the middle. I would be just outside doing my chores and I could hear the arguments happening inside. I talked to Lori. I just said, "You guys okay? You know, I hear you fighting sometimes."
Lori acted like everything was fine. She was all smiles and he was all smiles, and they covered it up pretty good.
I had no idea the extent of what was going on. I guess that's typical. Nobody knows what's really going on inside the house.
On a hot, late summer afternoon, the simmering tension inside the house erupts.
911, do you need police, fire, or the ambulance service? Please. I'm on my way to the sheriff's office right now. I got my kids lost. What's going on? It was a domestic violence dispute. My hand is bleeding.
I had just gotten home from work and my phone rang and it was Mike. And he said, "Can you come over? I need your help." He opened the door and he was covered in blood. Blood streaming down his face. There was torn clothes. I took a whole lot of photos just in case he needed it at any point in the future.
There was a domestic abuse incident in September of 2014 at Michael and Lori's house.
We're dealing with a scenario where we have the allegations made by Lori Shaver.
Lori tells the 911 operator she and Michael have been fighting a lot lately, but it never got physical until that night.
I grabbed my gun because he has a gun and I hit him in the head with it. I grabbed my kids and left.
He pulled out a gun on you?
Oh, yeah. He grabbed my car keys and stuck them in his pocket. I fought him to get my keys out of his pocket, and then I grabbed my kids.
Mike's version of events was she was the one that grabbed the gun. She was the one that was initiating the violence. He was trying to calm the situation down.
He said that they had been in a fight and Lori had threatened to kill him and herself, and that they had wrestled with a gun.
Has there been any drinking tonight? Yes, there has. We've probably had 3 beers since 2 o'clock. You both had 3 beers? Yeah.
Michael admits he kept the car keys from Lori to prevent her from leaving, but he says that's because he didn't want his wife driving with the kids after she'd been drinking. Both say during the struggle, Lori hit Michael on the head with her revolver.
The revolver that was on the bed looked like a .38, and it had pink plastic grips. Then I noticed there were roses all over the floor.
She didn't go up to Michael Shaver and just
Waylon Michael Shaver. He had a handgun he pulled on her, and I believe she tried to deflect the gun and it hit him.
Police are unable to determine who started the physical altercation with the pistol.
Ultimately, Michael was arrested for not anything dealing with the firearms, but he admitted, I grabbed her, and law enforcement arrested him for battery.
The battery charge is ultimately dropped, but things are never the same between the childhood sweethearts. Both Michael and Lori dug in and pointed fingers at each other.
Lori had been the victim of years of physical abuse by Michael Shaver. These acts were extreme. Lori was locked in a closet. Lori would be physically beaten.
I never heard Mike, scream at Lori or do anything physically. Lori trying to paint Mike into this monster and the abusive person in the relationship. Everybody that knew Mike knew that wasn't the case.
I do think Lori was abusive towards my brother and controlling. She would only let him talk for 20 minutes on the phone to me.
His friends would say that he'd come around and have bruises, and they'd ask him what was the matter, what happened. And, oh, Lori got mad.
Michael Shaver was not some innocent victim that married some violent woman. Michael Shaver was an aggressive guy, and she was always the victim of this aggression.
In the fall of 2014, a judge grants a no-contact order against Michael, and he's forced to move out of the house he shared with Lori and his kids.
Mike was staying in the airplane hangar where the precious metals plane was. I just figured it was for a day or two, and then later on I learned that he'd been down there, for a week or even more.
He was living basically at the hangar. There was like a meeting room with some nice big comfortable couches. There was a shower there and a bathroom.
She would kick him out, he would leave, a month or two would go by, and then she would have him come back again.
Michael's friends say that while he was living out of the house, he still keeps tabs on Lori, suspecting she's seeing other men.
When they would split up and Mike would be gone, there would be men that would come over quite often to the house.
Michael believed that Lori cheated on him quite frequently. Lori always denied that she was cheating on Michael. He would say, what do you think? Does it sound like she's cheating, or am I just losing my mind?
There was a time where I think Mike just needed to know what was going on at home. He and a friend would fly over Mike's house just to see whose truck was in the driveway, maybe just to make sure nobody was there.
He was willing to overlook that and get past it, but it showed the love that he had of willing to fix stuff to be with his family.
He loved her so much, I guess he forgave her.
Michael's repeated attempts to save his marriage began to strain his other relationships.
I tried to go visit Michael and his children in Florida, and always at last minute, I would get a message saying that Lori said it was a bad time, that we shouldn't come down.
But soon the communication from Michael went from infrequent to almost non-existent. He seemed to simply vanish.
He was there at the tractor show, and then the next week he was gone, and there was nothing in between. It was just gone.
And when Frank checks in with Lori, her answer only deepens the mystery.
According to Lori, Michael blew out of town, didn't want to be part of the family anymore.
Gone without a trace, or what? Michael and Lori had a roller coaster relationship, but in the fall of 2015, things seemed to be going well. So well that Michael has moved back in with Lori and the kids.
I know that he went home and that they were trying to work things out. He had quite a few ducks, and they were staying with the chickens in the chicken coop, and he wanted them to have their own duck pond.
He was digging out a duck pond in the back for her ducks because she wanted to raise ducks and chickens. So he was home, they were back together again.
But then things take another turn. November 7th, 2015, it's a day Frank Merritt says he will never forget. He and his family met Michael and Lori Shaver and their children at a local tractor show.
Oh, it was really hot that day. They do a show 3 or 4 times a year during the winter months. It's just a bunch of antique tractors, and it's like a flea market. Mike was really into that stuff. He really liked that old stuff.
But Michael's friend and coworker Frank says he could once again sense an unspoken tension between Michael and Lori.
She just wouldn't make eye contact with us. She wouldn't speak with us, and it was just kind of weird because she was usually more bubbly than that. And then he says, "Hey, I gotta go," so they left.
The next time Frank hears from Michael is by text, 2 days later.
He had texted me on Monday that he was gonna have to quit his job to save his marriage. So I just kind of backed out of it. I just left him alone. So when he didn't show up Tuesday, I didn't think nothing of it. It's just, well, he's got some problems. They'll work it out. And then Wednesday he didn't come, and Thursday he didn't come. And it wasn't until Thursday night that our manager came to see us.
After 3 days of no showing at work, Michael's manager reaches out to him and gets a surprising response back.
Mike's response was, "You can go ahead and fire me, I'm not coming back."
So just none of it made sense at all that Michael had sent a text message to his boss just up and quitting. He was known to be a very dependable worker and a diligent worker. That didn't add up at all.
Like, well, if he's not showing up and not calling, I'll go by and check on him.
But when Frank goes to Michael's house looking for answers, he only ends up with more questions.
Lori answers the door. I asked where Mike is at, and she said he's not home. And I said, "Well, what do you mean he ain't here?" And I said, "Well, his car's here." And his car was in the driveway. So she said, "He's not here."
Frank says Lori eventually told him that after a heated argument, Michael stormed off, catching a ride with his friend Robert to Georgia, and she hadn't seen him since.
Mike never told me he wanted to go to Georgia. He had never spoken about wanting to leave the state, leave the marriage, any of that. I thought he was happy here, and we were doing so well, and then it's like, huh? What an idiot. I felt like that was the wrong thing to do, you know, it's just walk away.
I reached out to Lori through Messenger on Facebook, and I said, "Do you know where Michael is?" And she said, "No, he left the kids, he's not paying child support."
This strikes Michael's sister Stacy as completely out of character for the brother she knows.
His kids meant more than anything in the world to him, and he would not just up and leave his children.
And when I was texting with him, he says, "I'm never coming back," and just wasn't answering his phone, never coming back.
I knew they were having some marital problems, so I felt like he needed some space.
He doesn't want to be involved with this craziness.
Could Michael have finally had enough of his rocky marriage and decided to ditch it all, his job included, and head north to start over?
It was his dream job. He would never quit. Nothing added up. You know, nothing made sense.
What was strange and unusual about the messages that Mike was sending to his friends and family?
The common theme of all of them would have been, "Leave me alone. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Just leave me alone. I don't have family."
He didn't want to be found. He wanted to be left alone. He was not coming back. He had abandoned his family, and he was gone.
These text messages were completely out of character for Michael. I think that the family really noticed that very quickly.
Michael's niece, Desiree Ruggles, got this text from him, flat out saying, "I don't have a family."
Is there a reason why he's pulling away from our family? Because he doesn't talk to us anymore? Does he just need time? And I got a little angry, and I'm just like, you know what? If you don't want to be a brother, don't be a brother.
Just when it seems he's gone for good and his wife Lori is moving on,
Lori met Jeremy at a park and their children began to play together.
Michael Shaver seems to show back up. Had she ever mentioned any concerns about Mike?
Yes. She goes, "I know he's coming around. I know he's harassing me. There's doors that were closed or open." And I'm like, "You need to get a restraining order."
Seems to be abandoning his life. He hasn't shown up to work, and when friends and family reach out to him, they get messages saying, "Just leave me alone."
According to Lori, Michael blew out of town, didn't want to be part of the family anymore, left the state.
Over time, with no sign of Michael, Lori moves on with her life, meeting a new man, Jeremy Townsend, or Jay, as he's often called.
He's in the military or was in the military. They ended up exchanging numbers, and a relationship developed.
Lori's fresh start also includes getting fit. She starts working with a personal trainer named Rebecca Filmer.
Got it, girl? Way to work, way to work.
How did you meet Lori?
So I originally met her at Gold's Gym. I met her through her then boyfriend, Jay Townsend. He introduced us as his girlfriend at the time. She had just lost a lot of weight and she wanted to start working out. Lori was super sweet. She was just someone that was very easy to talk to. She liked going out to dance and stuff. So we just kind of connected.
Now you end up becoming roommates. You moved in this neighborhood with her.
Yes, we became friends pretty close.
So close that Lori confides in her about relationships with men, including what Lori says was a difficult marriage to Michael Shaver.
She told me she was in this relationship that he made her feel bad about herself. And I started to understand why she wanted to lose so much weight, why she was so focused on her appearance. I mean, in session, she'd be in the mirror, like fixing her hair and making sure everything was just so.
And even though it seemed Michael had initially skipped town, Rebecca says Lori told her that she started to sense that he was back.
There was a time we're sitting in the living room and she's sobbing. She's just, I know he's coming around. There's stuff, doors that were closed or open. And I'm like, you need to get a restraining order, if it's getting that bad. She said, no, I don't want to be bothered. It's just going to kind of open up a whole nother can of worms.
Rebecca says Lori told her that she was divorcing Michael once and for all and moving on with her life.
And she goes, oh, I had the court appearance to settle their divorce. I'm like, oh, okay, how did that go? She said it was settled. She's officially divorced. And I was like, perfect.
But Lori's new relationship is far from perfect. She knows that man she's been seeing, Jeremy Townsend, is already married.
Jeremy's wife didn't know about Lori.
And Jeremy doesn't seem to be leaving his wife anytime soon, something that texts between the two show was creating a strain on their relationship. In April 2016, Jeremy's wife, Vanessa, gets a surprise. She's at work one day when she receives a flower delivery, but it's not from Jeremy. The delivery comes with a strange card.
Roses are red, violets are blue, my wife is a whore, your husband is too, sorry about this, check your Facebook message, we need to talk, Mike.
Then Jeremy's wife goes onto Facebook and finds a message from Michael Shaver informing her of the affair. He says he's installed a spy app on Lori's cell phone, and he includes screenshots of texts and explicit photos between Jeremy and Lori.
Basically, Mike was outing this affair.
Lori's relationship with Jeremy implodes after his wife finds out.
It was clear that he wasn't going to be leaving his wife. They were going to work it out, and him and Lori were over.
Lori moves on from Jeremy pretty quickly to another guy, Travis.
Travis Filmer was a youth leader at a local church. Lori met him through Rebecca.
I didn't know anything about her, but from appearances, she was really put together. I knew that she had kids. I saw how she interacted with the kids, so for me that was a very important thing. I've always wanted kids. I've always wanted a family. I know when I was a kid and my parents got divorced, it destroyed me.
The sparks between Travis and Lori first flying during a bonfire get-together at Lori's house.
Her smile is the one thing that just, stood out to me. It drew me to her.
After that night, it was Travis this, Travis that, and I'm like, oh my God, here we go. I think she has a type. When I've seen pictures of Mike and, the way that he would dress, it was similar to Travis.
We ended up going out to dinner. We just hit it off. We had a lot in common and decided to keep seeing each other.
Lori also told Travis details about her relationship with Michael.
From the things that she described to me, it was a very bad situation. She had told me that they were divorced. And I did ask if she was receiving any child support. And she told me that she wasn't, that he didn't want anything to do with the kids.
I'm Kendall Windsor. I'm Travis Filmer's mother. Lori was lovely. It was like he was with us one day, and then the next thing you know, he's living with Lori.
This is the person I want to be with. Not only did I fall in love with Lori, but I fell in love with Aiden and Isabel too.
Travis and Lori's love affair is moving quickly, and on New Year's Eve 2016, they decide to have a wedding ceremony right here in Lori's backyard.
We had friends, family come over. It was fantastic.
I was told they were getting married this day, that time, and I showed up.
Lori had fixed up the 5-acre property prior to the occasion, putting in a backyard fire pit. The couple later etched their initials into the concrete around it. Lori walked out to the Brantley Gilbert song, Fall Into Me.
So we're sitting on bales of hay. My dad walks her down the aisle.
The ceremony was underneath this big oak tree.
I, Travis.
Hi, Travis.
Take you, Lori.
Take you, Lori. We did this to really just show everybody and in front of God that we're committed to each other. This is a lifelong thing.
Travis, you may now kiss the bride.
Yay! So Lori has moved on and put her ex Michael Shaver behind her, but Michael's friends and family have not been able to do the same, still wondering why it's been so long. At this point, more than 2 years since any of them have laid eyes on him.
Clearly, something wasn't right.
And that lifelong friend, Scott Amatuccio, is about to make a stunning discovery.
It made my stomach sink right away.
Lori Shaver and Travis Filmer had a wedding ceremony in their backyard.
Until death do us part.
Just steps from that fire pit where their initials are etched in the concrete. And a year later, the couple had even more to celebrate.
And I looked at her and I was like, "Are you serious?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm pregnant." And I was just floored, like absolutely floored.
They would quickly add another child to their growing brood, along with the 2 kids Lori shared with her ex, Michael Shaver. Michael hadn't been seen by friends and family since he seemingly walked away from his life.
Michael would pop up every now and then with Facebook messages to his family, to his friends. I don't want to be bothered. I'm working on myself.
Even though the years were passing, friends and family said the occasional texts and Facebook messages led them to believe Michael wanted to be left alone.
Everybody rationalized it as give the man space. We knew what he was going through with the family by this point.
Yeah, I should have probably texted Mike more and called him, but we were never much into texting or phone calls. I had my first daughter, and I was so consumed in that. It was just not on my mind.
Scott then gets a phone call from his ex-fiancée, Katina Vasquez, that would change everything. She tells him she happened to be over at Michael and Lori's house 2.5 years ago, right after Lori said Michael skipped town.
She had noticed that Mike's possessions were there. Clothing was there, his wallet was there, his phone, all that was there.
His car was still there. His guns were still there.
Basically everything he owned.
Yes.
He walked away with nothing. I don't even know that he took his toothbrush.
Katina tells Scott that during that visit, she asked Lori where Michael was.
Lori told her that Mike got picked up in a black SUV one day, never came back. He would never do that to his family or kids. In a vacuum, you're not going to put anything together, but you start getting these other details, clearly something wasn't right. It's those details that made my stomach sink right away.
Eventually, Scott pieces together that no one has seen or spoken to Michael in 2.5 years. He decides it's time to reach out to Michael's sister in upstate New York to compare notes.
Scott and I just happened to be messaging back and forth one night, and we're like, none of this adds up.
Stacy and I had been talking. They were getting these weird messages. They'd be kind of short, out of character.
There was wording that he didn't use. He never called me bro.
There was a couple there that said, just leave me alone, I'm moving to California. Just some crazy stuff that just didn't sound like him whatsoever.
He had texted me one day and asked, what's Mom's number? I tried to call her, it must be changed. My mother's phone number has been the same for 30 years.
With his suspicions growing, Scott does what any of us might do when trying to track down his now long-lost friend. He logs onto Facebook.
I wasn't too active on Facebook back then, so I go to his page. And then I had noticed the profile picture had just been updated the month prior to some group of guys in a bar. I had to like zoom in and make sure like nobody looked like Mike in that picture.
Scott then does a reverse Google image search, trying to determine where this photo came from. Turns out, it matches a photo from a Bloody Mary mix company.
Clearly, somebody took that picture online and put it as his profile picture.
And Michael's recent posts also seemed off. They were different from what he typically posted in the past.
His activity on Facebook was usually pictures of himself, pictures of friends, pictures about the plane that they would work on. All of that ended, and then it started up with various silly memes that were just not in keeping with his personality whatsoever.
Michael's friend Scott, along with his sister Stacy, knew it was time for something drastic.
Since I was in New York and Scott was in Florida, Scott told me that he would go to the police.
And when I called, I said, I'd like to file a missing person report. You know, they asked, well, when's the last time you seen him? And frankly, I said, years. They didn't take me seriously at first because you're now filing a missing person report years later.
Scott is able to convince police in Florida that his concerns are serious enough to warrant a welfare check. And when a deputy goes to Lori Shaver's house, something catches his eye that's been hiding in plain sight for years.
And that's when I really started to getting chills up my back.
I'll take you there to see for yourself.
This has got to be the strangest case in my career.
What happened to your husband, though? Have you not seen him since 2015?
I had to rethink and re-question myself. Everything that had been happening was likely a lie.
And just when you think you know where the story is headed, a new twist.
Today, I'm coming to you. My family and I are begging you, asking for your assistance.
Everyone was just like, what?
There was just more and more twists and turns.
I'm living in the Twilight Zone, and I can hear the theme song going on.
I've seen it on TV, on the news, but I never, ever imagined this would be happening next door to me.
That's when you knew something was up.
We just started asking her questions about the whereabouts of Michael Shaver.
Did she say why he left? What happened?
She did not. She has no idea where he would be.
Lori called me crying, saying the police are here and they're looking for Michael.
He proclaimed he had the special skills to kill somebody.
When you walked out here, were you immediately surprised?
I really started to getting chills up my back.
But what about the chills when a totally unexpected person confesses?
Everyone was just like, what?
When you have a witness take the stand that says, I had a role in it, that's pretty incredible.
I know it sounds weird. I know it does.
The reality was that he was digging his own grave.
That was one of the most bizarre videos I've ever seen.
has got to be the strangest case in my career that I've ever seen. It was as though this guy had literally just vanished.
November 7th, 2015 was the last time anyone saw Michael Shaver alive. His family hadn't seen him. His friends hadn't seen him.
No one had actually talked to him on the phone or talked to him in person. It was very weird.
They will tell you he would never, ever leave his 2 children.
He had 5 acres of property and a tractor. He walked away with nothing.
It's been 2.5 years since anyone has seen or spoken to Michael Shaver. His loved ones are concerned. So his longtime friend, Scott Amatuccio, decides to call law enforcement. He requests a welfare check.
So this is South Claremont. We're probably 40 minutes northwest of Orlando. So this is a very rural area.
Corporal Corey Anderson was one of 2 deputies that respond to the welfare check call that day in February 2018.
It was out of the ordinary. I haven't seen a call like that in a long time.
What about it felt unusual to you?
Usually, a well-being check is, hey, I haven't heard my friend in a while. Can you go check on him or have him call me? Not anything like he's missing, he's not responding to calls, he's making posts that aren't like him to make. People just don't up and leave, you know?
So you pull up to the house. What's the first thing you do when you get here?
Deputy Morris and I, we meet, and then we approach the house together.
Did someone answer the door?
Yes, Miss Shaver answered the door. She had a 2-week-old infant in her arm, so she stood on the porch, and we just started asking her questions about the whereabouts of Michael Shaver.
What was her demeanor like? Was she friendly?
She was cool as a cucumber, and it made it almost alarming. It gave me chills speaking with her.
Lori really didn't seem very apprehensive or nervous or surprised.
The way that she was answering questions, withholding information.
What kind of withholding of information?
Some of the dates that she used for when he was last seen, the last time he was at work. The day-to-day things that she would know weren't adding up.
Did she say why he left? What happened?
She did not. She simply said that he absconded and has not been seen or heard of. Has no idea where he would be.
Corporal Anderson then asks Lori if he can take a look in the backyard.
She welcomed them onto the property. She appeared to be very cooperative. She appeared as though she had nothing to hide. Obviously, they noticed it was a beautiful, sprawling 5-acre piece of property, and they were able to walk the outside of the property and look around.
The deputies noticed multiple outbuildings in the backyard, as well as a chicken coop, rabbit hutch, a fire pit, and an above-ground swimming pool. But when they ask if they can perform a more thorough search of the backyard, things take a turn.
And that's when her cooperation ended suddenly.
She said, you guys need to get off my property.
Oh, immediately.
And you can contact my attorney. So that was a huge red flag for me.
That's when you knew something was up. She shut that down and couldn't get them out of there fast enough.
So detectives got the report from the deputies, and they began to plan their next steps and how they were going to move forward to get back out to the property and do a more thorough search.
I had just left work. I was on my way home, and Lori called me crying, saying the police are here and they're looking for Michael. She was very upset. She seemed like she didn't really know what was going on.
Lake County deputies say it was his friend who initially reported him missing. Today, we're learning more about Michael Shaver.
I turned on the news, and that's when it hit that he's actually missing, that it's not good.
I remember thinking it's a complete misunderstanding. They're gonna find that he just wasn't where he was supposed to be. It just kind of snowballed into he's missing.
Working to learn what happened to a man who's been missing. Channel 9 was there from the beginning. We went out to her house and said, hey, your husband's missing. Is there anything you want to say?
I wanted to ask you about the sheriff's office investigation into your missing husband.
I have an attorney.
You have an attorney?
Contact attorney statement.
She basically told us to get away from her truck, and she didn't want to talk to us. What happened to your husband, though? Have you not seen him since 2015?
His wife didn't report him missing at all, and years go by. You would think a spouse would want to talk and get his picture out, get the information out. She blew by her cameras. She had nothing to say.
Meanwhile, as detectives are digging for more clues into Michael's possible whereabouts, they discover some startling information.
They learned that his driver's license was expired. There was not a new driver's license issued in any other state.
Good luck. Have fun. Thank you.
His pilot's license were expired. There was literally no trace of Michael, no matter what they tried, no matter where they looked.
Detectives then start interviewing Michael's friends, relatives, and co-workers. They start building a timeline to try to pinpoint exactly when someone last laid eyes on him. And it turns out they think it was at that tractor show that Michael and his family attended 2.5 years earlier with his friend and co-worker, Frank Merritt.
He was there at the tractor show, and then the next week he was gone, and there was nothing in between.
And it was just days later that Michael sent that strange text to his boss, abruptly quitting his job.
Based upon all of these bizarre circumstances, we knew something had happened to Michael.
3 weeks after that initial welfare check, detectives finally secure a search warrant for Laurie Shaver's property.
It was a huge scene.
There was law enforcement up and down the road.
Investigators come in with cadaver dogs, and they start searching the property.
I've seen it on TV, on the news, but I never, ever imagined this would be happening next door to me.
One of the cadaver dogs is walked along the backyard and alerts to a dirt mound multiple times.
That's when they brought in all the big guns, the big equipment.
We began digging up that yard. We dug a very significant area. We realized that there was nothing to be found there. The fire pit was our next point of interest. Once they started digging, we heard some yelling.
And all of a sudden I noticed activity happening and running around.
I could tell something had been discovered.
Florida's Lake County Sheriff's Office are back at Michael and Laurie Shaver's home, armed with a search warrant. They're now scouring the property.
And they knew that it was something about that fire pit. Something was going on in that area.
The decision was made to bust up that concrete and dig down below that fire pit to see what we could find.
And there were tents up from investigators as they were excavating and sifting through the dirt.
Once they started digging, we heard some yelling. We knew we were onto something.
I have never seen anything like this before in person in my backyard. Oh, they're running.
At one point, investigators and the crime scene technicians, they're digging in that area. We see them put their hands over their eyes, and we said, hey, something just happened.
And I can tell you that we have found what appears to be a bone that is consistent with that of a human upper arm bone.
They began to dig, and 3 feet below, there was Michael.
A gruesome discovery in a backyard in Florida.
Police are finding what are believed to be human remains.
What did you find in that gravesite?
There was a blue tarp, and beneath the blue tarp were the remains of Michael Shaver. His body was found to be wearing a pair of underwear, a pair of shorts. He had on a pair of socks. There was a piece of a fitted sheet also around the body. So it was evident that the body had been wrapped up and placed in that grave.
How deep was this grave?
About 3.5 feet.
Investigators say the remains were skeletonized and looked like they had been there for quite some time.
When the body was discovered, Lori was sitting in her truck. My photographer and I walked over and we knocked on the window.
I'm on the phone with my attorney right now, and I'm not making a statement.
And shortly after, she took off. It just seems strange that that's when she decided to take off and leave after being there for hours while the search was being conducted.
3 weeks before the remains were found, back on the day of that welfare check, Corporal Corey Anderson was convinced there was something underneath that concrete. And this is where the fire pit was.
Yes, the cement slab was here.
It's what he noticed then that raised investigators' suspicions enough to come back with a search warrant.
As I was approaching the cement slab, you could clearly see a depression, and I took out my cell phone and just started snapping pictures.
And you saw that depression. Were you immediately surprised?
I was, and that's when I really started to get chills up my back.
You immediately thought it was a shallow grave?
Absolutely. It's unmistakable. It was the size of a human adult body.
It was really a remarkable sequence of events where a deputy who actually had the experience that this particular deputy did just asked permission, hey, maybe guys mind if I take some pictures and walk around the back of the yard? The right person saw what started this case.
I mean, I considered Mike my best friend. It's pretty tough knowing that he's laying in the dirt like that.
It was absolutely devastating. Then I had to go and tell my mother. It was the hardest thing in the world I ever had to do.
I just started wailing and crying, and it's a terrible thing. It's just terrible.
As painful as that moment was, Michael's family says, finally, all the hurt and confusion around his unexplained disappearance made sense.
When they said that they got all the remains out, I knew in my heart that was Michael.
Are you guys Michael's family?
You know, even though it couldn't have been identified that day, I knew that it was.
Buried in the backyard, police revealing new clues in the mystery disappearance of a husband.
I mean, that's just not something that we deal with and see every day. The media attention just grew.
Human remains were found buried in his wife's backyard.
The headline for the day was missing man's body found in his backyard. In that same place, his wife had remarried.
In the wedding video, you see her come down to that oak tree where they exchange vows. And her husband is dead, buried underneath that concrete slab that she's walking down to marry the next guy.
She had her wedding virtually on top of her husband's body.
We were sitting in the fire pit, by the fire pit, not knowing that Michael is under that fire pit. That's where I sat.
Until death do us part.
So this whole scenario, it's like I'm living in the Twilight Zone and I can hear the theme song going on. Do, 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 do. That's what's going on in my life.
Excuse me, sir. Do you guys know anything about what's going on inside? No comment?
When they found the remains under the fire pit, I couldn't believe that. Lori had kept telling me that she didn't know of anything.
But now investigators have Lori Shaver in their sights, and they want to hear exactly what she does know and when she knew it. After Michael Shaver's remains are recovered from a shallow grave in the backyard of the home he once shared with his wife Lori, the medical examiner determines that what put him there was a single gunshot to the head.
And the projectile was found inside of the skull. It was pretty much a straight-on shot to the back of the head.
Any DNA, any evidence of who would have put him there?
Pretty much everything in that grave site was sent to Florida Department of Law Enforcement for analysis, and there was no DNA that was found, mostly because of the decomposition process.
So over time, it's really hard to find DNA if it's in the ground, even if it had been there.
Yes.
But to many people's surprise, even after the gruesome discovery, Lori Shaver remains a free woman.
Lori wasn't immediately arrested, and that was something that was pretty frustrating for the family, but investigators had to build a case against her, and they knew that they would only get one shot.
Lori Shaver didn't get arrested right away.
Correct.
Why?
There were still phone records, Facebook records to obtain, and piecing together all of these different pieces of evidence to try to figure out what happened.
We knew he was last seen November 7th and didn't show up to work November 10th. So we believe it happened during those 3 days that he was killed by Lori.
If that's true, that's months before Lori met Travis Filmer, who says he believed she was divorced from Michael Shaver.
Lori didn't divorce her husband during this time that Michael was missing. Lori never went after him for child support.
Finding out that Lori was not divorced, that was a shock. And detectives are the ones that told me.
Travis says that after Michael's body was found, he and Lori didn't discuss the investigation.
Lori and I, we didn't talk about things. She never told me that there was a body on the property. I know based on my experience with law enforcement and being in trouble, it was extremely important for me to not ask about anything. Did I have questions? 100%. I very much did, but I knew that I could not talk to her about the case.
But detectives are asking questions, interviewing those close to Lori like Katina Vasquez, the ex-fiance of Michael's childhood friend. They wanted to know what she knew about Lori's supposed divorce from Michael Shaver.
She was telling me that she was filing for divorce. And then next thing you know, she's married. And I was like, how does that happen that quick? Like, it was just weird. Like, I'm like, this makes no sense.
Investigators also tracked down that friend of Michael's who Lori said picked him up in a black SUV and drove him to Georgia.
Did you ever give him a ride to Georgia?
Georgia? No.
No. Do you recall what kind of vehicle you owned?
I believe it was a Mitsubishi Galant.
You remember what color it was?
Blue.
When detectives talk to the Shavers' neighbor, Wilma, they hear something really dark and unexpected. She tells them Michael Shaver actually started the project that eventually became the fire pit and concrete slab where his body was found.
He was working very hard to make her a duck pond back there. And the reality of what he was doing was that he was digging his own grave.
What physical evidence was there?
We have a body buried in the backyard. We have evidence of a gunshot wound. And we have a caliber bullet that was consistent with the type of weapon that was sold by Lori Shaver.
Another witness comes forward to say that after Michael disappeared, leaving everything behind, Lori began selling his belongings.
You are the owner of JB Guns in Bushnell, Florida, is that correct?
I am, yes, sir. After I had seen the news report and I saw the lady's picture, as in the wife of the missing person, I was like, I bought all of his guns, I'm pretty sure of. She's like, well, he just up and left. And I'm just selling all this stuff.
Key to this case, police think Lori Shaver was hiding that her husband was gone for good, pointing to data suggesting those Facebook updates and messages to family and friends, seemingly from Michael, were actually coming from her.
These Facebook message postings by both Lori Shaver's account and Michael Shaver's account had the same IP address, which means the same person was using them both.
Everything pointed back at Lori Shaver.
More than 2 years after Michael Shaver's remains were found, his wife has now been arrested for his death.
Lori Shaver is charged with second-degree murder with a firearm. She pleads not guilty.
I didn't understand how she was possibly arrested. Yes, they're saying that they found a body on the property. Yes, they're saying that Lori had some major involvement in this. There's always two sides to a story. There always is. There's no doubt in my mind that Lori didn't kill Michael.
After about 2.5 months in jail, Lori Shaver is released on bond.
That's when this bizarre video surfaces of Lori and her defense attorney making a plea to please donate to her defense fund.
Good morning, I'm Jeffrey Wiggs. Sitting to my left is Lori, a client of mine.
I don't know why I've been targeted, why I've been set up, or charged with this heinous crime. I am not guilty. I am a daughter, I'm a friend, I'm a neighbor, I'm a servant of God, I'm a wife, and I am a devoted mother of 4.
In that same video, Lori's attorney says his client is innocent, and at trial, they are prepared to say who actually killed Michael Shaver.
We're not going to mention his name. He proclaimed he had the special skills to kill somebody.
As her trial nears, Lori Shaver's attorney makes another shocking claim. Now, it's not just one person responsible for her husband's murder, but 2. And who they say that second shooter is takes everyone by surprise.
Honestly, I've never heard such crazy.
Happening today, jury selection will begin in the trial of a Claremont woman accused of killing her husband.
In September, almost 9 years after Michael Shaver was last seen alive, prosecutors are now hoping to prove that Lori Shaver was the one who killed him. But they'll have to do it without fingerprints, DNA, or other forensic evidence.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about common sense.
In your opening remarks, you made the comment that you have to use a little bit of common sense here.
We have the defendant's husband buried in her own backyard, and that points directly to Lori Shaver.
In their opening statement, the defense finally discloses who they say actually killed Michael Shaver. It wasn't Lori, it was Jeremy Townsend, or Jay, that man she had an affair with before meeting Travis. And they say someone else fired a shot too, Lori's then 7-year-old daughter, Isabel.
I shot my dad. That was a bombshell.
The defense presents a stunning story to the jury.
Isabel Shaver and this young girl, in desperation and in fear, runs and retrieves fire as she believes she shot Michael. They were separated. Michael came in the residence one morning. Lori was getting the children ready for school. Lori refused to go back with him. He got angry, started beating on her. Lori ended up on the floor. Isabel retrieved a handgun, and she believes she shot Michael Shaver.
And at that very moment, the defense says Jeremy stormed into the house and took control.
And walks Jerry, takes a gun from Isabel, shoots Michael Shaver, says, Lori, get these kids out of here, I'll take care of this.
But prosecutors say this story is preposterous. They argue that Lori Shaver acted alone and killed Michael for her own selfish reasons, to be with her then boyfriend, Jeremy Townsend.
What is the motive here?
Lori really wanted to be with Jeremy. She actively sought to ruin that relationship between Jeremy and his wife.
She pretended to be Michael in order to out Jeremy to his wife. And she tried to do that through Facebook messages from Michael's Facebook account. And when she didn't get a response from Jeremy's wife, Vanessa, she sent a bouquet of flowers to Vanessa with a card.
The card that came with those flowers, did that include a message?
It did.
And can you go ahead and read that message to the jury, please?
Right.
That's okay. Ms. Townsend, is this a difficult day for you?
It is. It says, roses are red, violets are blue, my wife is a whore, your husband is too. Sorry about this. Check your Facebook message, we need to talk. Mike.
The flowers that were delivered to Vanessa Townsend were actually paid for from Lori Shaver's bank records.
Up until this point, did you have any knowledge that your husband was potentially having an affair?
No.
Lori was convinced that Jay was leaving his wife. And that couldn't have been further from the truth.
State calls Jeremy Townsend.
He walked into the courtroom in a suit, but he looked like Aquaman with the long hair.
Was there ever a time that Lori Shaver expressed to you that she wanted you to leave your wife to be with her?
Yes.
And was that what you wanted?
No. They're supposed to be friends with benefits, no strings attached.
He went on and said, I had nothing to do with this.
At any point did you shoot or injure Michael Shaver?
No.
At any point were you involved with disposing of the body of Michael Shaver?
No.
And after the affair was exposed, what happened with your relationship with Lori?
I cut it off.
They say it's not the crime that gets you caught, but the cover-up. And prosecutors argue that Lori's attempts to impersonate Michael online show all the signs of a badly executed cover-up.
Facebook helped solve the murder.
Michael's family up north had heard from his Facebook account.
Was there a period of time where you reached out to Michael Shaver in attempts to communicate with him?
Yes. It says, hey, Uncle Michael.
And what was that response?
Who are you? I don't have any family anymore. I have no clue who you are. Now stop messaging me.
Lori was using his cell phone and his Facebook account to present this facade that Michael was still alive.
The defense argues the digital evidence is unreliable. It could have been anyone accessing Michael Shaver's Facebook account.
You'll ask yourself this: how does this digital data prove that Lori Shaver killed Michael Shaver? It doesn't.
But prosecutors say they have more than digital evidence. They argue that Lori had access to multiple firearms that could have killed Michael Shaver, including the pink and black .38 caliber revolver that she sold after Michael was last seen.
Did you examine that firearm?
Yes, I did.
Were you also provided a projectile recovered from the skull of Michael Shaver?
Yes. The projectile was in very rough condition.
Despite the damaged condition of that projectile, were you able to determine the caliber?
In this case, the caliber was determined to be .38 caliber class.
But the defense points out that the bullet recovered from Michael Shaver's skull could not be definitively linked to her pink handgun.
Let me just see if I'm summing this up correctly. The projectile that was in the body could not be linked up to the gun that you're sitting there on, correct?
All class characteristics were in agreement. The result of the individual comparison was inconclusive.
Okay. How many guns fit into that class?
Thousands of guns, if not tens of thousands.
With the state's case laid out, it's now the defense's turn, and they're about to call their star witness, Isabel Shaver, Lori and Michael's daughter, who was just 7 years old when he was last seen alive. She's now 15 and says she's prepared to tell the jury what really happened.
Isabel, I'm sorry. I have to do this. Do you know anything about the death of your father?
Have you given thought to taking the stand?
Still haven't decided. I would love to be able to speak my story.
Now, the defense also confirms with me that they say her daughter will take the stand.
Lori Shaver's defense is built on what she says really happened the day her husband died. And to lay out that story, they call to the stand the person they claim fired what they say was the first of 2 shots, her 15-year-old daughter, Isabel.
My name is Isabel Shaver.
Because she's a minor, Judge Carrie Rada does not allow Isabel's face to be shown during her testimony.
How old are you, Isabel?
I'm 15. I turned 16 this Sunday.
Would you explain your relationship to Lori Shaver?
Lori Shaver is my mother. Me and her are very close. She's like my best friend and a mom in one.
Has anybody pressured you to testify in this cause?
Absolutely not, no.
Do you know anything about the death of your father?
I do.
Do you know anything about how your father died?
I do.
Isabel tells jurors a stunning story that when she was just 7 years old, she witnessed a violent confrontation between her mother and her father, Michael, while the two were separated.
He pushed her onto the ground and he started kicking her in the stomach and in the back. And he was like saying that he was going to kill her at this time. I heard my mom screaming for help, obviously, and then he put his foot on the side of her face and pushed it into the ground. And I didn't hear her anymore. And so I went to my mom's room and I went at her end table and I grabbed her gun and I shot him.
Isabel Shaver goes on to say that after she fired that shot, the man her mother was dating at the time, Jeremy, or Jay as they called him, came barreling into the house.
He took the gun from me, and then he shot him again. He told my mom to take us out of the house, take us to school. We're not to tell anybody. We can't call the cops. We can't say anything, or else he was going to do the same thing to me and my brother.
Isabel stated this house was so riddled with so much atmospheric tension that it just didn't seem different. It just was kind of the way they were living, but she didn't say anything to anybody about it.
Remember, Jeremy Townsend testified he had no involvement in Michael Shaver's murder or the disposal of the body. And when prosecutors cross-examine Isabel, they challenge her memory of this event.
You don't know what grade you were in when that happened, right?
I don't.
You don't know what month this happened in, correct?
Correct.
You don't know what year this happened in, correct?
Yes.
When you have a witness take the stand that says, I had a role in it, that's pretty incredible.
I think it was very clear that she was willing to do whatever she could to try to protect her mother and avoid her mom going to prison. It also was not consistent at all with any of the physical evidence. Her version of events involved 2 shots, and there was absolutely no question that there was only 1 shot in this case, and that was the one to the back of the head.
The defense would call Lori Shaver.
Next up, the woman at the center of the case, facing life in prison, takes the stand in her own defense.
Let's talk about the event that's landed you here.
I got up, got my coffee, and then that's when I noticed he was sitting out on the back patio. So I went out there, and we started talking, and it escalated. He was holding on to me. And at that point, I was just trying to convince him, like, okay, enough. We'll work it out. And he told me not this time. I was screaming as he's smashing my face into the porch.
What's the next thing you recall?
I more or less heard it. And then I think I seen her.
What's Isabel do?
She had fired a gunshot. The next thing I recall is seeing Jeremy, and hearing the gunshot at essentially the same time. He tells me to take the kids, get them out of the house, and he would take care of it. He insinuated that if we said anything, that he was not going to take the blame for this.
So what did you do?
I took the kids. I left.
Lori Shaver tells the jury that when she came home that day, Jeremy was gone, and so was Michael's body. According to Lori, she had no idea his remains were buried in her backyard.
Lori, the jurors are going to ask themselves, why didn't you call the police?
Scared? I didn't know what to do.
When prosecutors finally get their chance to question Lori Shaver, they challenge her for more details about what they say is a story full of lies.
The biggest question I have for you is, when did your husband get killed?
The exact date I cannot recall. It was beginning of May 2016. It was not November.
Prosecutors say Lori wants jurors to believe that Michael was actually alive in May because that's a full 6 months after he was last seen by anyone.
When he left and moved out, he left his car, correct? He stopped going to work and lost his job because of it, correct?
I was not aware of that at that time.
November 2015, he just vanishes off the face of the earth. No one can account for him, correct?
I don't believe that that's true.
The day that he showed up in May of 2016, what vehicle did you use to get to your house that day? So he gets walked? When you take what she said happened there that day and then just break it down, well, if that's true, where was Mike's car? If that's true, when his body is found, why is he dressed like he was in bed sleeping?
It's hard to make a story fit all of the different pieces of evidence if it's not true.
She made up this May 2016 story to distract. Jeremy Townsend talked to law enforcement 3 separate times. The evidence that has been presented is not that in May of 2016, Jeremy Townsend shot this man in the back of the head. It's that Lori killed him in November of 2015. Mike is buried in her backyard. She's the one that installs the fire pit and puts the cement slab over his body. She lied to friends, family, and law enforcement about his whereabouts for years. All the evidence points to her because she is guilty of murder in the 2nd degree. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Canuccio. Mr. Wicks?
Yes, sir.
Has any single witness taken the stand and shown you one piece of evidence that established Lori Lee Shaver killed Michael Shaver? 0. 0.
And then it's left to the jury to decide which version of the story is the truth.
And you wondered in the end if the person who did this was ever going to be held responsible.
Has the jury reached a verdict?
Closing arguments are done for the Lake County woman charged with her husband's murder.
She is facing 3 possible charges, 2nd-degree murder being the biggest one, up to life in prison.
The biggest thing that I struggle with and that my heart breaks for is my kids. I don't want to see the look on their face when I have to tell them Mom's not coming home.
The jury deliberates for just under 4 hours before returning a verdict.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the charge. The defendant is guilty of 2nd-degree murder.
The jury saw through all of her lies, manipulations, all of it. They didn't buy her story for a second. They didn't buy her daughter's story.
It was hard to hear Isabel saying those things about her dad, and I kind of feel really bad for her. Everybody that knows Mike knows he had a great relationship with both of his kids.
Your reaction, your thoughts as soon as that verdict came down?
Elation. We were very happy. This was a long time coming. It will not bring him back, but there will be justice for him finally.
It was celebration, sadness, several different emotions. She was part of our family, somebody that you feel that you love and you trust. So also a letdown in some ways, and to see somebody that you did care for at one time that did something so bad.
No, I did not get the answers. Why? Why wouldn't she have just let him go in a divorce? She could have carried on her life.
And she got married here.
Yep, right out there. We walked by here, walked through here, walked all the way out, and yep, right past, you know, a human being. That was just, it's so disturbing because, again, we've been out here. I've stood right where he was, and I didn't know.
It upsets you.
Yeah.
Michael, he was such a great, great person. He loved everybody with all that he had, and I think his spirit will finally be able to be at peace.
Hampshire Fire and Rescue received a call.
The house was really ablaze.
Fire officers, when they went upstairs, they found a naked female. There was blood on the walls. She had some cable ties wrapped around her wrists, and she had stab wound injuries to her neck.
I screamed and shouted and cried. I felt like half of me was gone.
I wouldn't have expected something like that to happen in this area. You just really feel for those children that have now got to grow up without a mother.
3 men arrived at her address, trying to break in, and had threatened to strangle and have sex with her.
We got told by CID that they had somebody that they thought murdered my sister.
On the south coast of Hampshire, on the Fareham Peninsula, lies Gosport. Once the base for the Navy supply chain, this picturesque town acts as a commuter hub for Portsmouth City across the harbour.
The Gosport, I'd say, is quite a quiet place to live. It's got a lovely coastline, and it's quite good for families. There's quite good connections to schools around the area, and you can quite easily get across to Portsmouth, to Gunwharf. Yeah, I'd say it's quite a nice, relaxed place to live for families and also the elderly.
Gosport really does have its own identity. The only way you can get there is either on ferry from Portsmouth or a couple of roads coming in and out of Gosport, so you very much feel like you're on the peninsula there, kind of isolated.
I think there is quite a different culture. It seems it's quite separate from Portsmouth because of the water.
We've got a really good leisure centre, lots of nice pubs, and there's always a park just literally round the corner. And you can get anywhere on a bicycle as well, because we've got fantastic cycle tracks here. We have a lot of people from all over the world really living here, and plus because it's naval, it just really has a lot of people here that are from all walks of life, really.
You have areas where housing is very close in, rammed together, and you have others, bigger, larger houses with the more affluent.
In Gosport, especially with this road, you definitely could knock on any door and ask for help, definitely. And a lot of people have lived here all their lives.
Which is true of 27-year-old Kelly Ann Case, who was born and spent most of her life in Gosport.
When we was growing up, she was very bubbly. She loved to do dancing. She loved sports. She was very fun. We used to like doing like rollerblading when we was younger. We would do like all different activities, even if it was just walking to the beach and just acting like big children. Even though we was probably 15, 16, she would love it. We would argue and bicker, but it would never last very long. We would always make up within about half an hour.
But Kelly had to grow up quickly, after she fell pregnant in her teens.
Kelly was a very young mum, but she never pictured herself having children, but she told everybody it was the best thing she ever did.
But being a single mum didn't stop her from finding the time for love.
She was always lucky in love. Sometimes they didn't work out for many reasons, but she was always careful with who she loved and who she didn't love. She was actually on her own for a while because that's what she wanted. She wanted to be on her own, but in past relationships she has been very lucky in love. She would always make people laugh, and she would always be like the highlight of the day, no matter how down you was or how low you was. She would always make you laugh.
Police, what's your emergency? I woke up and I opened the window, got the kids up like you normally do, and then could smell a really strong smell of burning. It wasn't a normal smell of burning. I could see smoke coming out from the house.
The residents of a quiet street in the north of Gosport awoken to a house fire.
Hampshire Fire and Rescue received a call from a couple of builders that were in the area that saw smoke billowing from the address in Grange Crescent.
The house was really starting to go ablaze.
The builders were working in the area and they noticed some black smoke billowing from the address of Kelly's. And concerned that somebody may still be in there, they started banging on the windows trying to raise the alarm. There was no response, and Hampshire Fire and Rescue arrived at the scene fairly quickly.
There was probably 4 or 5 firemen in the back garden, which is very, very tiny. The glass was starting to smash. They were in and out of the house, obviously with the hoses going and trying to put the fire out.
Kelly's house is ablaze. And as neighbours watch, all thoughts turn to her children.
Because I'd seen the children going in and out every so often, and I was thinking, oh no, I hope they're not there. I hope nobody's there. That's what my worry was. I wanted to know if the kids were there because it was just a bit heartbreaking, really.
Fire crews break through the front door.
They found 2 areas that were alight in the ground floor of the address and then searched the rest of the premises.
The fire crews search the front bedrooms and find no one. But then, they make their way into the back bedroom.
And it was inside there that the firefighters found a very shocking and grisly discovery of Kellyanne Case's body in her bedroom.
Firefighters are suddenly confronted with a horrific scene. Kelly has been the victim of a brutal and sadistic attack.
Fire officers are used to going into dangerous situations and dealing with traumatic incidents, but when they went upstairs, they weren't expecting to find what they saw, which was a naked female tied up with multiple stab wounds and an obviously slashed neck. I mean, it was pretty traumatic.
What immediately happened then was the firefighters alerted the police whilst they tackled the fire that was still in the house.
And over the next 2-3 hours, more fire engines and police cars. The road was pretty much full. And everyone was talking about it on Facebook and on what's happening down there.
News spreads across the community and reaches Kelly's family.
I immediately rushed to Kelly's house and then spoke to the police officer and asked whether it was my sister's house, and they confirmed that it was. 2 CID officers come up to me and my mum. They both turned around and said that there is a body and it is deceased. I kind of screamed and shouted and cried.
Police believe there's no time to lose if they want to catch whoever was responsible for Kellyanne's killing.
Because of the way Kelly was found and the significant injuries that were so obvious, it was called as a murder investigation very, very quickly. And so we take control of the scene immediately. We try to identify who the victim is.
Detectives realised that the fire was set deliberately, potentially to destroy evidence.
We noticed there were 2 seats of fire initially. One was in the kitchen and one was in the living room, and it looked like bedding had been piled up and deliberately set alight. Upstairs in the back bedroom, Kelly was lying on the bed, naked. The bed was completely stripped. She had some cable ties wrapped around her wrists, and she had some obvious stab wound injuries to her neck. Her face looked like it had taken some kind of physical assault as well, and there was blood on the walls and on the floors.
Police believe that the motive for the murder could have been sexual in nature.
I think when you find a female naked in bed like that, tied up with cable ties, the assumption one has to make is that this is possibly a sexual assault. The pathology is then carried out. Can we then confirm that?
The situation of Kelly's body and the manner in which she was attacked leads investigators to consider a terrifying possibility.
There's certainly a number of lines of inquiry and hypothesis that a senior investigating officer would form at the beginning of any homicide investigation, and one of those would be that this is a stranger attack. This is somebody who is not known to Kelly.
In the coastal town of Gosport, police are investigating the murder of 27-year-old mum of 3, Kellyanne Case. Her body has been found after her house was deliberately set ablaze.
Kelly was stripped, she was tied up, and she was tortured and then brutally stabbed with a knife.
Detectives believe that the sadistic and sexual nature of the murder suggests it could have been a stranger who killed her. And so they have to consider a terrifying prospect.
When we commenced our investigation, we contacted the National Crime Agency to see if there are any outstanding similar offences anywhere in the UK that we could liaise with those local police forces and share information with.
With the police having to consider this could be the work of a serial killer, at the scene a major incident is declared, and the street has been secured.
We had tape going from the end of the road all the way across, down that end, and then they cordoned off all the way down the bottom, all the alleyways at the back. Yeah, it was just literally everywhere, tape everywhere. Even
all the little alleyways that go in between the houses had.
Yeah, because you've got a little alleyway there, and they were just cordoned off, didn't they? Yeah.
The news that a young woman has been brutally murdered stuns the close-knit community.
When we found out it was a murder, that was horrific. That sends alarm bells, you know, because you don't know who it is.
Covering Gosport, there's lots of low-level crime that goes on. There are lots of break-ins to houses and sheds and outbuildings. But deaths and murders are very few and far between and send shockwaves through the community when they happen.
It's just really sad that I wouldn't have expected something like that to happen in this area. And especially for a young woman who's kind of around our age, it definitely makes me feel quite uncomfortable. And you just really feel for those children, 3 children that have now got to grow up without a mother.
Whenever any murder happens, it has a huge impact on the community, particularly if the suspect is outstanding. So people are worried, who is it? Why have they done it? And will they strike again? So our job as the police is to try and reassure the community that, you know, we are working hard to try and catch the killer and that we will do that as quickly as possible.
Suspecting that this could be a stranger attack, officers start house-to-house inquiries, and a neighbour steps forward.
During our inquiries, we came across a witness who did identify a male that he saw at about 5 to 7 on the morning of the 30th of July, who was just in the area of Grange Crescent.
A neighbour had reported seeing a sort of a scruffy, unshaven person near Kellyanne Case's home.
Described as looking a bit odd, surveying the premises, wearing a cap. And he said he's sort of driven up and down that road about that time for the last 10 years and never noticed anyone before. So this person definitely stood out for him and seemed suspicious.
Who was this man? And did he have anything to do with Kelly's death? But before detectives progress further, a check on Kelly's property uncovers a worrying development, which places their theory of a random stranger attack in doubt.
What was strange is that there was no sign of forced entry. The back door was unlocked, which would either suggest it's someone incredibly lucky trying doors, or somebody knew that Kelly was there and that the back door was unlocked.
Had Kelly known her killer? Or was it just pure chance that her door was unlocked so early on a weekday morning? The investigation shifts and focuses on Kelly's life circumstances.
In any homicide investigation, we would carry out a victimology, which is looking at the detail of the life of the victim, which includes, you know, previous partners, potentially people having an affair, issues at work that we might uncover. So it's quite common for us to go through the victim's history with a fine-tooth comb.
As detectives question friends and family, they uncover that Kelly was going through a difficult period in her life.
Kelly struggled with a lot of different things in life. She was always open and honest with people, but when she did struggle, sometimes Kelly did drink.
She'd fallen on some difficult times. She'd recently had her children taken off of her by social services on a temporary basis. She had issues with alcohol and drugs, and I would describe her as vulnerable.
The investigation also uncovers elements about Kelly's lifestyle.
I mean, Kelly was well known. She had a wide circle of friends. Her neighbours weren't big fans of hers, if I'm honest. She would have regular visitors to the address, 3 or 4 parties a week.
She used to have parties with music and stuff.
I had seen quite a few people going in and out of the house, obviously just thinking they were just friends.
Often police would be called to excess noise issues, antisocial behaviour issues, and she would probably hang around with the wrong people, I would suggest.
As officers investigate further, evidence shows that Kelly had been threatened just a few months previously.
Back in March 2019, Kelly had had some kind of party at her address. There was an altercation there where the male ended up with a fractured jaw, and as a result of that, Kelly received some threats by family members of that man, and she had to flee the address for her own safety, so she left the area for some time and returned to Gosport a couple of months later.
I think she left for about 3-4 months, but she couldn't be without her family, so she decided to come back.
But with the threat still hanging over her, Kellyanne's neighbours noticed a change in her demeanour.
She kept herself to herself. She used to hang around out her front door having cigarettes, and you'd walk past her and she wasn't very chatty. But we didn't see a lot of her, to be honest.
No.
Heard a lot of her, but didn't see a lot of her.
Police believe Kellyanne was vulnerable and involved with some unsavoury characters. And after interviewing friends, key information points to a potential lead.
She had had this row the night before with one of her friends, so that was key that we identify who they were. We wanted to establish what the row was about and who was involved. So lines of inquiry were set in relation to identifying those individuals. But we also found out through her phone that she had been receiving threats from 3 men who had arrived at her address, were trying to break in and had threatened to strangle and have sex with her. This was told to one of her friends. And obviously through house to house, we'd established that people had been at that address during the evening at various times. So again, it was really keen to try and identify those individuals quickly, because they may have some vital information, or they may be the killer and they may have vital forensic evidence on them still.
Could any of these people have something to do with Kelly's death? But before detectives can follow the leads, they get an unexpected call. A 32-year-old man called Will Valander comes forward.
My sister was actually seeing Will Valander at the time.
We believe that one of Kelly's family contacted Will Valander and they notified him of the death. It then quickly dawned on him that he was possibly one of the last people to see Kelly alive, having left her address at about 6:30 that morning. As soon as Valander made contact with the police, the decision was taken to arrest him on suspicion of Kelly's murder and seize his phone and his clothing so that we could then forensically examine those. One might question, well, if he's rang the police, why would you arrest him? Surely he's got nothing to hide. But if you flip it the other way and think, well, actually, he's got things to hide and he's now trying to give a reasonable excuse as to why his DNA may be at Kelly's address or on Kelly, and he's getting his story in first before the police catch up with him.
But Valander's connection to Kelly and his ultimate link to her murder is about to point the investigation in a completely new direction.
He was obviously jealous, and he decided it was his turn to go and see Kelly and have sex with her.
In Gosport, police are investigating the murder of mum of 3, Kellyanne Case, who was found stripped, bound and stabbed after her house was set on fire. The day before she died, Kellyanne told her friends that 3 men had turned up at her house, threatening to break in and rape her. Police also have a report of a suspicious man loitering outside her house in the early hours of the morning. But all attention has fallen on Will Valander, who has been arrested on suspicion of Kellyanne's murder.
When I found out Kellyanne was murdered, I felt like half of me was gone. Some CID officers come to my mum's house and told my mum everything that happened and that it was murder. And then my mum sat and read a piece of paper to me and my siblings of what actually happened. We got told by CID that they had somebody that they thought murdered my sister. We didn't actually know who it was at the beginning.
Police have arrested Kellyanne's friend, Will Valander, who came forward saying he had spent the night with her before she died.
When Will Valander was in custody, he was interviewed by detectives, and actually he gave a very detailed account of what his movements were the night before Kelly's death. And he explained that he'd been drinking most of the day. I think around midnight time he'd received a phone call from Kelly. She was quite upset. She said she'd had some people round earlier in the evening, she'd fallen out with one of them, and could he come round?
He was out in Gosport and he was with his friend Brendan Rowan Davies.
So Brendan was a friend of Will Vallender. They would meet every now and then, and on that night Kelly called. Will had been out all day drinking with Brendan, and Brendan decided to tag along. So they stopped off, bought some vodka, and then went off to Kelly's, where they consumed the vodka and also had some cocaine.
After drinking and taking cocaine, Vallender says he and Kellyanne went to bed, leaving his friend downstairs.
What Will Vallender then said was that him and Brendan Rowan Davies then left the home of Kelly at around about 6:30 in the morning.
Both Will Vallender and Brendan Rowan Davies left her home alone. They caught a taxi back to Vallender's house, and then Rowan Davies said he was going to go back to his home as well.
With Vallender claiming that Kellyanne was alive when he and Brendan left, police need to build up a full picture of what really happened that night. Key to this is interviewing his friend.
Officers were tasked to go and locate Brendan Rowan Davies, again somebody who would have been the last person to have seen Kelly before she was found murdered. They went to his home address and there was no response.
With no sign of Brendan, Vallender tells the police that he'd spoken to his friend earlier that day.
Vallender had contacted Brendan Rowan Davies to tell him to contact the police as well. And the fact that Brendan Rowan Davies didn't makes that extremely suspicious in my view.
What had happened to Brendan? Was he afraid to speak to the police? While the investigation unfolds, the community is coming together to pay their respects.
People kept coming down the road, laying flowers, laying teddy bears, candles. Her sister was there quite a lot, and it was just really sad. I felt for the children more than anything.
When Kellyanne Case's death was formally announced by the police and she was identified, there was an outpouring of grief for this young mum, and that sort of materialised with a fundraising campaign to raise money, which ultimately raised about £1,300 for her funeral.
As the community mourns, the investigation is centering around the last two people who saw Kellyanne alive, and police have made a second arrest.
So within 24 hours, the police located Brendan Rowan Davies. He was with his brother over in Portsmouth. Police were dispatched and he was arrested on suspicion of Kelly's murder.
Rowan Davies' response to the police when they mentioned the murder or death of this woman was, I had an idea about that. Apart from that, he said very little. He was taken into custody. He was questioned and he just replied no comment to the questions that were asked.
With Brendan refusing to answer any questions, detectives turned to CCTV analysis to verify Vallender's account.
Because Vallender gave a detailed account of his movements with Brendan Rowan Davies on the way to Kelly's address and also leaving there. So we were able to establish, following the route that Vallender said he took with Brendan Rowan Davies, various CCTV points to identify the two of them together.
The footage shows Vallender and Rowan Davies taking a taxi from the end of Kellyanne's Road at 6:30 a.m. The taxi drops them off at Vallender's address 10 minutes later, where they're seen crossing the car park. 20 minutes later, Rowan Davies is seen heading towards his flat, arriving back at just before 7 a.m. Vallender's account of his movements seems to be true. But then, police analyse what Brendan did next.
Brendan Rowan Davies made his way back to his home address. We had cameras in that area that then picked him up about half an hour later, leaving his home address, but this time in a change of clothing, which is suspicious in itself.
Brendan is captured on the bus CCTV. But where is he going?
So having picked up the suspect on the bus, we know he got off just outside Cambridge Road, and so we're able to then scope the area for CCTV. Unfortunately, we came across CCTV in the kebab shop just behind me on the corner of Cambridge Road and Brockenhurst Road.
Brendan is seen walking back towards Kelly Ann's house, just over an hour after leaving it.
The CCTV places him at the house for about 40 minutes.
Well, we believe that when Rowan Davies let himself into the address, he crept upstairs and Kelly was likely to be asleep. You know, it was the early hours of the morning. She'd been up all night partying. And he let himself in, and I think at that point he then held a knife point and then tied her up and brutally beat her. And then some 40 minutes later, he's then picked up again on CCTV, heading back towards his home address.
But he doesn't head straight home. Instead, he walks to his mother's house, a short distance from where Kelly Ann lives.
So we know that around 9 o'clock in the morning, Rowan Davies returned to his mum's address, where he then changed his clothes and then left that premises with a bag, and he was seen heading along this footpath. 2 hours later, a witness came forward who found some burning remains of clothes, which we then recovered.
Further CCTV evidence shows Brendan retracing his steps home.
We then find him at his home address on CCTV going to the bin shed area. But this time he's carrying 2 bags, one blue one and one white one, and he disposes of them.
Police immediately search his property and the bins.
What they find is a pair of knickers, which they believe to be Kelly's, and also some training shoes that have some blood on them.
Police also find items which match those found on the victim.
Kelly was bound up on the bed and she was tied up with some cable ties around her wrists. We found some further cable ties at the address that matched the same description of those found around Kelly's wrists.
Having uncovered both the means and the opportunity to commit the murder, the investigation turns to a potential motive and who this prime suspect is.
The connection between Rowan Davies and Kelly Ann Case was mainly through Will Vallender. Rowan Davies appeared to be this sort of hanger-on, this kind of tagged-along friend. You know, the two knew each other, or knew of each other, but I don't think they were ever close friends particularly.
He was a big man. He was 6'3", quite a strong man. We understand he had a low IQ, about 50 or 60, and he also had learning disabilities, including dyslexia. He was known to the police. He had about 6 previous convictions, but the most alarming one was a previous conviction for burglary of a house he broke into where the female was still on the premises. So a really concerning MO, I would suggest.
Detectives believe they have their killer, and when forensics return, it confirms their suspicions.
We then get the forensic results on the cable ties that were found around Kelly's wrists. And they have Kelly's DNA on them, obviously, but they also have Rowan Davies's DNA on them. So we went to the Crown Prosecution Service with all the evidence that we'd amassed against Rowan Davies, and they agreed to charge him with the murder of Kelly Ann Case.
Will Vallender is released without charge, and a trial date is set for Rowan Davies. But when he gets his day in front of the jury, his account of what happened suddenly puts the case in question.
He said he was grabbed by a masked man who was armed with a knife, who threatened to kill him if he told anyone what he'd seen.
In Gosport, Hampshire, police have charged Brendan Rowan Davies with the brutal murder of mother of 3, Kelly Ann Case. CCTV footage shows that after spending the night partying with Kelly Ann and her friend, Rowan Davies returned to her house on the morning after. His DNA has been found on zip ties used to restrain her, and the blood found on his trainers is Kelly Ann's. But he denies murder. Whilst police believe they have a solid case, they also have concerns as the trial approaches. as not only was an unknown man spotted loitering outside Kellyanne's house on the morning of the murder, but she had recently been threatened.
The fact that we had these issues, these unknowns of potentially people threatening Kelly in the past, death threats to Kelly, people falling out with her, that was the biggest concern, is that we needed to convince the jury that Brendan Rowan Davis was the person responsible.
The trial gets underway at Winchester Crown Court.
The atmosphere in court for the trial at the beginning was tense. Obviously, there were family members and friends of Kellyanne Case who were anxious to see justice be done.
I was at the trial the whole 4 weeks in Winchester. I was there with many family members, including my mum, who never ever missed a day. It was very tiring, but it was all worth it. It helped me to try and grieve for her, because I didn't want to grieve for her. I didn't want to believe it. And still to this day, I still feel sometimes that she's going to walk through my door, and she's not.
The pressure is on for Hampshire Constabulary, especially as Rowan Davies, who had remained silent during the investigation, has made some concerning claims to his defence.
Prior to the trial, the defence issue us with what's called a defence case statement. And what Brendan Rowan Davis was saying was that he did go to the address on that night with Will Valander. He did leave with Will, but when he got home at 7 o'clock in the morning, he realised that he'd left his tobacco at the address. And so he went back to Kelly's to retrieve his tobacco. He said he found the back door left open, so when he went into the address, he went upstairs. He saw Kelly on the bed, naked, but she was unconscious. And then he was grabbed by a masked man who was armed with a knife, who threatened to kill him if he told anyone what he'd seen. He said he was so terrified he left the address and didn't tell anyone.
Could Rowan Davies be telling the truth? Was there an unknown masked assailant involved? But on examination, police believe there are major holes in his story.
He was cross-examined by the QC for the prosecution, and things just didn't stack up with his defence. The fact that he'd gone into the address and then suddenly this unknown masked attacker had grabbed him but not harmed him at all, so there was no injury to him, that didn't stack up. He then tried to explain why his DNA was going to be on Kelly and why Kelly's DNA was going to be on him by the fact that he was then pushed onto Kelly. The cable ties that Kelly had around her arms were the same ones found at his home address. He couldn't give an explanation for that. The change of clothes he had with him at the time that he went to Kelly's that he then changed into when he went to his mother's address, he couldn't give an account for that. That didn't make sense.
He claimed to have been absolutely scared and frightened by this mystery man, but CCTV footage from inside the bus that he took when he went home after killing Kellyanne Case showed that he wasn't petrified. He went to his mum's house afterwards and didn't say to her that he was scared at all. He said nothing to anyone until he had to suddenly defend himself in court.
By Rowan Davies' account, he left Kellyanne alive but unconscious with the masked assailant at 8:30 a.m. But just 3 minutes later, builders noticed smoke coming from Kelly's house.
The timings of Rowan Davis's account don't stack up.
In court, there was a lot of disbelief as to what Rowan Davies was actually saying.
Under cross-examination, Rowan Davies is asked how the masked assailant could have tortured Kellyanne, killed her and set fire to the house in the 3 minutes after he left.
His whole case was that within about a 3-minute window, this mystery man had murdered Kellyanne Case, and that Rowan Davies had walked off terrified, too scared to tell anyone about it. Rowan Davies' whole case seemed to be ludicrously implausible, just didn't seem to have been able to happen at all.
I thought Brendan's story was rubbish. This third person would not have allowed him to walk out of the house. You're not going to allow a person that have just witnessed you kill somebody, you're not going to allow them to walk. And in that space of grabbing his backy and then walking out of my sister's back door, not running, walking.
Whilst Rowan Davies' account is under scrutiny, the prosecution know they need to establish a motive for murder.
Brendan Rowan Davies clearly had some sort of sexual interest in her. It emerged at the trial that he'd said to her that he'd always fancied her.
But she just laughed that off and didn't take it seriously.
Kelly would never have a relationship with him, and Brendan didn't like that.
An analysis of Rowan Davies' phone also shows that he had followed the couple when they went to bed.
What Will Valander and Kelly didn't know was that Brendan then, knowing that they were having sex in the room next door, got his phone out and started secretly videoing them having sex on his phone.
They said he was his arm put round the door kind of thing whilst he was filming that. He later deleted it, but this was a man who'd just been rebuffed by her with a laugh.
Will Valander describes that he had left the house with Rowan Davies at 6:30 in the morning.
Will asked Brendan to make sure that the back door was locked, and Will would make sure that the front door was locked and post the keys back through. But we now know that Brendan didn't lock the back door, so he could gain entry when he come back.
CCTV then shows how Rowan Davies had made his way home, changed clothes, and returned to Kellyanne's house. The prosecution say he's armed with a knife and zip ties. He enters the house through the door he purposefully left unlocked.
It was quite clear that Rowan Davies had gone back there with a sinister intent.
When Rowan Davies led himself into the address, he crept upstairs and Kelly was likely to be asleep. And I think at that point he then held her at knife point and then tied her up and brutally beat her. He was obviously jealous that Will Valander had sex with Kelly that night, and he decided it was his turn to go have sex with her. And she probably put up a fight, fought him off, and that's when he stabbed her.
In court, it's revealed that the knife wounds Kellyanne suffered were likely to be from an attempt to torture and control her.
When the pathologist gave evidence at the murder trial, he told how Kellyanne Case had suffered some horrific injuries, and he had to show sort of CGI reconstructions of these and stab wounds and slash wounds to her neck. She did also have broken ribs, broken bones in her body. From what emerged at trial may have been a panicking Rowan Davies who tried to sort of revive her.
We did get told in trial that she would have felt it and it would have been very painful. She had multiple stab wounds from her chest to near her hips, just basically prodding her with a knife. And he cut her throat 7 to 10 times. It has played on my mind a lot, but she would have bled out really fast and she wouldn't have felt it after a couple of minutes because her whole body would have just gone numb.
The prosecution say that Rowan Davies then stripped the bed and used the bedding to set the house on fire. He then walked to his mother's house, where he changed into clothes he brought with him, and later goes to a nearby alley to burn the ones he had worn to kill Kellyanne. But he does keep one item, a pair of women's underwear.
And one might think this is possibly a trophy that Rowan Davies has kept as a result of this horrific crime. He had taken them believing that they were Kelly's when in fact they belonged to a friend.
Rowan Davies is cross-examined for 4 days, and his account of Kellyanne on the night before she died is one of concern.
He was talking about things like how he was consoling Kellyanne Case because she wanted to, according to Rowan Davies, sort of kill herself that night because her children had been taken away from her.
It's then disclosed to the jury that Rowan Davies had been convicted of burglary 2 years previously.
He'd actually gone into a Gosport mum's house, kind of barged his way into the door, and the mum and children had to barricade themselves in a bedroom upstairs. But when the mum and her children came out, they found a butter knife that was on the stairs. When he was arrested for it, he was telling the police that he had heard someone was burgling the house, and that's why he'd acted and gone in, painting himself as a good Samaritan. And it was so shockingly similar to his defense case in the murder trial that it wasn't him, it was somebody else. I think that was a really chilling moment in the trial.
But the defence have one final seed of doubt to cast. The account of the 3 men whom Kelly had said were threatening to break in, rape and strangle her just a day before she died.
There is this fly in the ointment, was these 3 unknown people that had allegedly threatened Kelly 24 hours before that, threatened to break into her house and sexually assault her, and we never identified those individuals. I would suggest they probably didn't exist and were part of Kelly's paranoia at that time. As laughable as his defence case statement was, what was concerning for me is that there is a fly in the ointment there, for want of a better word. And all the defence need is to cast reasonable doubt around the account that the police say had happened, and then Brendan Rowan Davis walks.
After 3 weeks of hearing the evidence, the jury retires to consider the case.
The courtroom is an emotionally charged area at the best of times, and when you know the jury are coming back with a verdict, everyone is on tenterhooks, you know, waiting for that verdict, and you hope as a police officer it's going to go your way, and you hope for the family it's going to go their way as well.
The jury returns to the courtroom after 4 hours of deliberating.
After 16 days at trial, the jury came back unanimously with a guilty verdict of murder. And Rowan Davis was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment.
I was intently looking at Rowan Davies, and I saw him just sort of shaking his head as the foreman read out the guilty verdict.
When we found out that he was sentenced 30 years without parole, my family and me was happy that we got the justice for my sister, but it was never going to bring her back. I personally think that he is vile, he's disgusting, and I hope to God I'll never see him again. I think he's a very, very sick individual that should never ever be released.
I believe if you take a life like that and you murder someone so horribly, I think you take a life, you should serve life.
Yeah, life should be life,
Life
not
should be life.
not 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is, or you can get out of good behaviour and stuff like that. Life should be life.
It doesn't seem like justice. She was young, she was only 27, and she would have had years and years of her children, so it doesn't seem just in what she's lost and what her children have lost in years and what he's getting for that, because he'll come out and he would be a middle-aged, late-aged man, and he can still do things with his life, and that's something that she'll never get the opportunity to do.
After 2 years, Kelly Ann's family are slowly coming to terms with their loss.
Us as a family have lost a big part, especially my mum and her children. And they've lost their mum, and my mum has lost her daughter. Kelly was always the happiest and the kindest and the caring out of all of us. And I would always like her to be remembered for the person she was and not for what he did to her.